Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting will now come to order. Hello, I'm Donna Savigny, President of the Board of Education, and I would like to welcome you to the July 15, 2020 Board Updates meeting. In keeping with the Board's commitment to open communication with the community, this meeting is being streamed live on the CCPS website at www.carrollk12.org and broadcast live on Channel 21. We are also recording this meeting so that it can be accessed on demand on our website and broadcast throughout the month on Channel 21. This will be a hybrid meeting in which some board members are present in the boardroom. However, some board members and staff will be participating virtually. Due to the COVID-19 restrictions, the public will not be able to attend the meeting with the exception of those who wish to speak during citizen participation. Citizen participation is scheduled on the agenda for approximately 5 p.m. Speakers will be allowed in the meeting room individually for the allotted 3 minutes to address the board. Citizens who wish to speak must adhere to the social distancing guidelines and safety precautions we have previously publicized in communications about public comment for this meeting. The Board of Education will also continue taking public comment related to tonight's agenda items through alternate means. Citizens not appearing in person for public comment can write to the board through email or U.S. mail. Comments received will be posted on the website. For board members and staff who are participating in the virtual meeting, I would remind us all to silence our cell phones and other devices around us that the microphones may pick up. Also, we should each silence our microphones when we are not speaking. Now, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, board members, I need a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Battaglia.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Dr. Dorsey. Thank you. Board members, any questions or revisions to the agenda as published? Okay. I would like to make one quick comment just based on citizen participation for this evening. We do currently have a group of 15 or so folks waiting outside, so we're planning to take all 15 who have already signed in. And then if additional folks come in from this point forward, we're going to ask that they speak at we'll try to allot time at the end of the meeting. Does that make sense for all board members? So we'll add an agenda item to allow for additional folks to potentially speak later in the evening towards the end. Could I have a motion from someone to amend the agenda in that fashion, please?
I'll motion.
Okay. Moved by Ms. Battaglia.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kyler. Okay. So we'll add that one item at the end for additional public comment. Any other comments or revisions to the agenda? No? Okay, then I will call for the vote on the agenda as amended. All those in favor, if I can get a verbal aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. And so we will move on directly to the public participation section. And Ms. Herbert, if you'd like to read the guidelines.
To have an orderly presentation of comments by the public, the following guidelines apply. Speakers will be allowed in the boardroom individually for the allotted 3 minutes to address the board. Citizens who wish to speak must adhere to the social distancing guidelines and safety precautions we have previously publicized in communications about public comments for this meeting. Citizens not appearing in person for public comment can write to the board through email or U.S. mail. Citizen participation is not intended to be a question and answer session. However, if citizens have specific questions, the superintendent will assign a staff member to make contact during the board meeting to arrange a time to respond to questions. The superintendent board reserve the right to correct misinformation presented as factual after the conclusion of the citizen participation period. Statements to the board should relate to a recent agenda item, an agenda item that is expected to appear in the future, or a matter of general policy over which the board has authority. Personnel matters, pending appeals, the action of statements of individual staff, or items related to employee negotiations are not appropriate topics and may not be discussed. It is the intent of the board to allow all citizens an opportunity to speak. Therefore, the board has scheduled time on the agenda for citizen participation. The board reserves the right to limit the number of speakers on a particular topic so that all topics may be addressed. If 30 minutes is passed, which we know we are going to have anyone else that signs up later this evening, they may be allowed to speak at the end of the meeting. Comments are limited to 3 minutes or less. When the allotted time expires, the speaker is permitted to complete a sentence and return to the audience. But at this time, they will exit out an outside door there in this room. The public may not display signs or posters during the board meetings. In lieu of signs, or if you are unable to complete your comments in an allotted time, individuals are encouraged to submit remarks to the board in writing. And our first speaker tonight is Brenda Gallagher.
Hi, my name is Brenda Gallagher, and I am a biomedical sciences teacher at the Career and Technology Center. I was the 2016 Carroll County Teacher of the Year and the 2018 Maryland STEM Teacher of the Year. Prior to teaching, I was the Director of Microbiology Research at a pharmaceutical company. I give my background because I am both a highly accomplished scientist and educator, and while it's important to listen to concerned citizens, most have no background in microbiology, virology, or public health. By coming here today, I wanted to state what should be a very non-controversial position during a global pandemic that's still raging in our communities, that our school system should be supporting a full virtual return to school this fall. At the present time, it's unequivocally unsafe for conducting traditional in-person learning. Research is certain that COVID is airborne and highly contagious indoors. Additionally, the science behind transmissibility among children is far from settled. Our children are not experiments, and it's our responsibility to be the grown-ups in the room to keep them safe. In our school system, we have fire drills, lockdown drills, and active shooter trainings. However, the rate of harm from all of these events combined is much less than the death rate of COVID. These events are so extraordinarily rare, yet we prepare for them. But when an ongoing pandemic is staring us straight in the face, we pretend it's not there, because we are rightfully scared and have a level of cognitive dissonance that boggles the mind. Open your eyes and look around. Disneyland is still closed. Other open-air theme parks are operating at 30% capacity. Major corporations and our military refuse to meet in person. Perhaps the most telling example is that the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health is not planning on meeting in person for the remainder of 2020. Therefore, any push for us to return to schools in person is misguided and amounts to the following statement. Carroll County Public Schools knows that an in-person return is unsafe for staff and students, yet we intend to do so anyway. I am also advocating for a virtual return this fall as a parent of a 6- and 9-year-old. I spent countless hours this spring working with both my children with their online education, as well as administering virtual courses for my own students. It was very challenging, and I completely get that working from home with little ones is very trying. I also understand and empathize with working parents who still struggle to find childcare and supervise their students' virtual school days, although the hybrid plan that's presented does little to ease that burden. The alternating A-B days are even more problematic since I refuse to send my young son, who has other health conditions, into a building on a B day where he'll never get the benefit of a deep cleaning that the A students will have. What the public and my family wants most is for this virus to go away and a return to normalcy. But we need to work within the reality that this is far from over, and normal will not be an option for this September. My students and I certainly want to return to the classroom, but I value the life of my family and students more than a careless and irresponsible plan to bring us together in the middle of an ongoing pandemic. You're facing one of the most important decisions of your tenure because lives are certainly at stake. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Celeste Jordan. Sorry, there's stuff here.
Okay, good evening. I'm Celeste Jordan. I'm a teacher for CCPS. I have always wanted to be a teacher. My fondest childhood memories are teaching my favorite doll Pebbles, and my two favorite stuffed animals, Ruff Ruff and Mr. Elephant. My best Christmas gift ever was when I got my own chalkboard. Make no mistake, I want to be with my students. It is where I belong. However, as I tell my students each semester when I go over the safety regulations and where the orange dot is that we hide under, I do not intend to be one of those hero teachers who sacrifices her life for her job. Every semester when I finish the safety lecture, I say to my students that the reality is I stand a better chance of dying from one of you giving me the flu than a school shooter. We laugh because it's meant to lighten the mood. Now, it is not so funny. What educators of Carroll County accomplished this spring was great, but it was not distance learning or teaching. It was crisis learning or teaching. It was meatball surgery for those of you old enough to remember MASH. Educators would be better prepared for any future online teaching. CCPS would be better prepared to support students, parents, and staff. I would suggest before any sort of reopening that CCPS does a test run at all levels in several schools. A test run of a few hundred people, including students, and not just the SGA and NHS kids. Gets lots of different students in there. Staff and others, let's see how this is really going to work. I would also suggest that all central office personnel sign up to be substitute teachers because we will need you in the buildings. A final thought. I attend school board meetings on a regular basis. I have watched them from home during the shutdown. It's worse watching them on TV. Generally, in attendance are the board members, county commissioner, superintendent, Miss Gaddis, and all the people along the side that run the tech side of things. The school lawyer, the chiefs, the directors, all in their assigned seats since January of last year. I look around and I see a handful of people in this room. The schedule for the next meetings was published and says only some board members will be present. I hope you are not saying to the community that while you are not willing to meet in person yourselves, you are willing to open the schools and put students and staff in that very position. Thank you. And I also will say, I do not envy you this position. This is a once-in-a-century decision, but it is your decision, and as Brendan said, lives are at risk. Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Celeste.
coming tonight, Celeste.
Next, Devin Rothschild.
Hi. Good. Well, you guys are like so serious. It's making me nervous. Good evening, board members, and Dr. Lockhart and Carrie. It is been a while since I've been here, but I am feeling called to speak as a teacher tonight. I know genuinely that each of you is here because you want to serve your community, and I know that your decisions are based in that, and I know that in my heart. I have begun to imagine my classroom next year, like the good things that could happen. I may only have 15 students, which means I can connect better with them. I can be more culturally diverse. I can work with them and their needs. We can go outside exploring more. I can make this work for my students. And I am willing to be flexible and bendy. The union will be mad, but I am willing to eat lunch in a classroom. I am willing to clean. I'm willing to lead healing circles. But in order for me to do any of these things, I need to know that my health has been a priority in every decision that has been made. This plan does not allow for 6-foot social distancing. That has been the common practice for several months. This recommendation is rooted in science. It is a recommendation you are practicing here yourselves. It is the single most efficient way to ensure that we don't spread the virus. With 50% of my students returning, I will have more than 18 students in my classroom. With the most flexible and bendy seating arrangements that I can come up with, my students will never be more than 3 feet apart from each other. My colleague down the hall has a science room with tables bolted into the floor. She will have 3 students at each table. They will be 18 inches apart. There is not a single acknowledgement of teachers with risk factors in this reopening plan. I have a colleague at another middle school that asked me to speak on her behalf. She will be 8 months pregnant on the first day of school. How do you plan to protect her without following social distancing guidelines? Last year, when a teammate was out sick, we would simply absorb their students because we didn't have enough subs, right? So I had 44 kids in my class. That is not possible. We had so few subs last year that the school system canceled professional development because we could not get sub coverage. That's not going to be different this year. So how are you going to protect me if I now have to cover for my teammates' class? I want to welcome my students back in the fall. I absolutely do. But I need to do it with the confidence that the school reopening plan is based in science and that we have followed basic guidelines to ensure we are limiting our risks. Based on the current plan, I feel forced to choose between my own personal health and my career. And honestly, at this point, I'm not sure what is going to be the choice for me. I do have a risk factor. I only have one more sentence.
Okay,
While I know no plan is going to be perfect, I am asking you to please follow the scientific guidelines and ensure that we are at a minimum able to follow the social distancing guidelines and be 6 feet apart. And I do not envy you. Somebody said to me, you know, the good old days when we were talking about closing schools. So that's, I mean, it was a joke. I'm being sarcastic, which you probably can't tell, but I don't envy your decision. I know nobody's going to be happy with everything, but thank you for your work.
Thank you. Next, we have Misty Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Bye, Devin.
Good evening. My name is Misty Kelly. I am a science and STEM teacher here with Carroll County. When I read the plan for reopening, I had a million questions going through my head. How am I going to teach full-time for 4 days a week and at the same exact time monitor my online kids with only 1 day to play catch-up in the middle? How are the B-Day kids going to experience a clean classroom? When my kids in middle school are rotating through their classes during the day, how am I going to clean the lab tables in between? How am I going to help a student with a math problem in my science and STEM class if I can't get more than 6 feet away from him or 6 feet close to him? A million questions. And then I realized that as much as I want to go back to school, teaching STEM, distance learning, hands-on project-based class is going to be a nightmare. But my health and the health of my children that I teach are more important than that. My mother lives with me. She's in her late 70s. She has severe rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease. She is super high risk. She has not left the house since mid-March except for absolute necessary doctor appointments. I rarely go out because I'm her caregiver. And now you're going to expose me to 100 children every week, not to mention all the staff. And I have to bring that home and risk my mother's life because we can't do virtual learning. I highly recommend that you consider MSEA's plan to go all virtual this fall. I think it's the only safe choice. And there is no good choice here. As a science teacher, I get that. But I think it's the only safe choice. My husband is also on borderline high risk. He's in his late 50s and diabetic. So I've got, but he'll be okay. It's my mom. Like, am I going to risk my mom's life because I have to go to work? I don't see a choice in that plan for me as a caregiver of a high-risk person to go all virtual myself. The kids get that choice. Central office staff gets that choice, apparently, but I don't. And that's a major problem for me. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for coming tonight.
Next, Stacy Nolan.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Nolan. I'm a chemistry teacher in the county. I'm also a Westminster resident, and I'm an acting guardian for an 11-year-old. So I do not envy your decision that you have to face, and I'm sure by my comments you'll figure out which way I'm leaning. But really what I wanted to talk to you about is the idea of want versus need. In the 3 months that I was home teaching, I was also helping to facilitate the learning of the 11-year-old in my house, who is a 5th grader at Westminster Elementary. And I had my own classes to prepare for, but I will say that his teacher did an amazing job of supplying lessons for him. The teachers in this county, we did what we had to do when we went virtual, and we made it work the best we could. But his teachers provided lessons, and I facilitated those lessons. I am sure that if we had to do it again, we'll be better at it than we were the first time. I did not homeschool him. I facilitated. His teacher taught him. One of the other things that I did in that role is that I taught him the difference of want versus needs. That's just a life skill that I felt it was my need to teach him. I want to go back to school. I want to be in my nice, renovated lab room and teach in there and work with my students and interact every day. I don't need to be in that classroom, though, to make the same impact that I can make on the computer. Sure, it's going to be harder. I'm going to have to adapt. I'm going to have to find new ways to reach the kids. But I think you all know that you've hired really good teachers in this county, and that's what we do. We adapt, and we find the best way to make it work. I want to work in a safe environment. Not only do I want that, I need to work in a safe environment so that I know that when I go home, I am not bringing anything home to the 71-year-old mother that lives with me. I need to know that my students are not going home and making their families ill. I need to know that my students who have autoimmune diseases are not at risk because they chose to come to school and be in that environment rather than stay home. Because I know that they're going to want to come to school if they have that option, even though they may know that it's not the right decision to make. So I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. Again, as an adult, it's my role to teach my own 11-year-old and my students the difference between wants and needs. I just hope that as you make your decision, whatever that decision is, that you will remember that science does not care what you think. So please make your decisions based on science and the health and safety of everyone concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, next, Amy Levine.
Good evening. I am an 8th grade science teacher and 10-year veteran teacher in Carroll County Public Schools. I am here tonight to share some of my concerns regarding the CCPS reopening draft plan. I appreciate the difficult decisions that must be made in order to return students to a constructive learning environment. I know parents want their students to go back to school, and I want to be there to greet them. But as Maryland's numbers regarding COVID-19 are still higher today than they were on the day CCPS closed its doors on March 13th, the data to support opening schools to students in September is inadequate, even at 50% capacity. Safety should be at the forefront of all decisions made by this board and by CCPS officials. Teachers have a right to work in a safe environment. Last year, one of my 4 classes had 36 students in it. Under the hybrid plan listed in Stage 2, a similar class this year would have me teaching 18 students in person while 18 are at home for virtual learning. The CDC recommends 6 feet in order to properly social distance between people. I will not be able to space lab tables at the appropriate distance if I have 18 students in my classroom, even if I remove some of my own furniture as the draft plan suggests. Page 46 of the draft plan says social distancing is a key component to limit transitions, that school environments in general are not conducive to social distancing. This is absolutely true because even at 50% capacity, in just one day as an educator in my school, I will likely be seeing 55 students and upwards of 35 staff members. 100 people a day is not social distancing. Cleaning and disinfecting are an integral part of stopping the spread of COVID-19. Page 39 of the draft plan states that CCPS has limited human resources and operations to support routine, thorough disinfecting throughout the instructional day. The draft plan recognizes the lack of safety in opening schools even at 50% capacity. The safety of teachers and staff members is of paramount importance, and this is why I support the Maryland State Education Association's call for virtual learning for the fall semester. Carroll County Public Schools Option 3, a completely virtual learning model for all students, would allow educators to facilitate learning to the very best of our ability and keep everyone safe. Now is the time for CCPS and the board to focus on procuring laptops and internet service for every student and teacher in this county in order to ensure success. A perfect solution is not possible, but while we still face the first wave of a global pandemic, a safe solution is possible. Keep Carroll County Public School teachers safe and vote for a virtual opening of schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For coming tonight.
And next, Tom Scanlon.
Hi, I'm Tom Scanlon. I'm recently retired, so I'm going to miss some of this fun, unfortunately. But anyway, I would like to thank Carroll County Public Schools and the Board of Education for the countless hours of work that have been put in to plan for the 2021 school year. When schools closed in March, we took a balanced, common-sense approach to meet the needs of distance learning. And we have a lot to be proud of when you consider the fast turnover from traditional school to virtual school. Moving ahead, we need to acknowledge that you have an impossible task, creating hybrid models for instruction and distance learning and all that stuff. It is impossible in this environment of uncertainty. There are two things, though, that you can count on. One is your goal is a moving target. The realities of COVID-19 change on a daily basis, and as soon as you think you've figured it out, something new will arise. Governor Hogan or Dr. Salmon will come with a new directive, CDC might come out with new guidelines, whatever. The conditions on the ground are going to change between now and September. Count on it. And secondly, no matter what you do, someone will find fault. Guaranteed. You can't please everyone, and there is no perfect solution. So you do your best and take all the stakeholders into account. Now, I also have two suggestions or recommendations, whatever. First, listen to the public health professionals, not the politicians. Too many people in elected office seem to have an agenda that has nothing to do with what is best for students and educators. And number two, don't be bullied by outside groups who present misleading or incomplete information. Children can get and transmit COVID. Okay, CDC, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, they all agree. They all say the same thing. So if someone tells you otherwise, they are wrong. And even though the symptoms may be mild in children, remember there are adults who work in these buildings and in our schools. There are adults who can get sick. So finally, I hope that CCPS has a comprehensive plan to assess all the employees as to whether or not they are in the high-risk category. That is, without that information, it will be impossible to safely reopen schools. Thank you for your time. Good luck.
Thank you for coming tonight, Tom.
And next, we have Christina Olson.
I worked really hard to make sure it's under 3 minutes this time. So, thanks for having me. I represent Return to Learn, a community-based, nonpartisan group focused on equitable, practical, evidence-based, student-friendly policies for reopening schools. The shutdowns were sold to the citizens as a means to flatten the curve. Today, there's 440 total people hospitalized with COVID. That's out of 6 million people in the state of Maryland. Only 129 of them are in the ICU. What baseline are we aiming for to have real conversations about getting our kids back to school full-time? Continued distance learning or attending school on alternate days is not practical or equitable for low-income and rural families who may not have the means or the ability to purchase the necessary supplies, including devices and internet connectivity for children to participate in virtual learning. We must not forget the unintended consequences of school closures to our families and children physically, emotionally, and psychologically. 200,000 to 4 million cases of child abuse are going unreported. 43% of Maryland children receive free or reduced meals that may not be getting them now. 110,000 Maryland children are receiving special education services, many of which haven't received them since the shutdown. Proper, free, and appropriate public education is a right to all of our American children. So my question to you, the decision makers, are, how will you ensure that all students have connectivity, supplies, and access to virtual learning? Will the school provide financial assistance to families to purchase the necessary supplies? Have the teachers been trained to properly facilitate virtual learning? How will this training be evaluated? How many hours of instructions will the teachers be providing per day virtually to our students? What curricula do you plan to use for virtual learning, and who has accredited it for virtual instruction? How will virtual learning be evaluated? How do you truly test a child's knowledge and concepts remotely? What training will be provided to families to support their virtual learning? Is there enough time to do that? How will virtual learning work for our younger students, K through 5? How will they model reading, speech, and fundamental skills? What platform will the school be using for virtual learning? Has this been properly tested to ensure the safety of our children? Lastly, and most importantly, how much is this going to cost, and how long is it going to take to implement a quality virtual program for our children? We urge you, our elected officials, to get creative, to not dismiss any idea or possible solution to get our students back into school. Can we rent tents to reduce class size? Can we reopen schools such as North Carroll to distribute children? Can we partner with our local churches or our libraries to provide spaces for class? Can we partner with our local businesses that may have office and retail spaces that aren't being used? Can we bring in trailers? All of those things I realize have a cost, but the cost of virtual isn't free either. We're not advocating that all students have to return to school. We're advocating that all families have the option to return to in-person 5-day face-to-face schooling, which all experts agree is imperative to our children. The minds of many is so much more powerful than the minds of few. Thank you. 2 minutes.
Thank you.
2 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For coming again. Okay. Christine Maxey, please. Thank you again.
Hi, my name is Christy Maxey. I am a parent of a high school senior and a 8th grader at East Middle. I am also a member of the Return to Learn, just as the previous speaker was. I am for returning 5 days a week, normal, everything. Given the choice, that's what I choose. I do think that people should have a choice because there are people that are scared. And if those people want to keep their children home and or those teachers want to stay home, that's their choice. I have a couple of points that I don't think have been brought up. They're not all my ideas. I've read them online, mostly through the Return to Learn through the Maryland Public Schools. More time online. It will result and has resulted in more child exploitation, more predators, privacy concerns. You have a video recording your home. Anyone can see that. It's through Google. Who knows if it's secure? There was a student, I think, in Baltimore County that there was some type of gun was seen. The authorities were called and the house was searched. That's a privacy issue. Teachers. Most teachers I know do want to return. However, the teachers that don't want to return are portraying the idea that they think they're no better than a fancy app or a YouTube video. That's how those of us that think you should return are viewing it. Once it's decided that online learning is a substitute, you're making yourself obsolete. Jobs will be cut. They don't need as many teachers. The education aspect, my children received very little education in the spring, very little. My high schooler had maybe one assignment a week. I'm not saying all teachers did that because I know a lot of them did over and above, especially elementary teachers. I cannot speak for them. My children received nothing. The mental and emotional health we've all discussed. There's a Facebook video out there that's called My Son Died Because of COVID. This man's son committed suicide because he was quarantined and freaked out over a video game. It's heart-wrenching. Watch it if you haven't. Masks are not healthy. Social distancing is going to be nearly impossible. Screen time. We've complained about screen time for ages, yet we're asking them now to spend more time 6 to 8 hours a day for school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Rachel Sternberg.
All right. Hello. My name is Rachel Sternberg, and thank you. Oh, I guess I can take this off. Thank you for this opportunity to address all of you, and especially thank you for all of your extremely hard work in making sure that our kids stay safe and healthy while providing quality education. I am advocating for in-person learning for kindergarten through 2nd grade. My son will be in kindergarten this fall. And I wanted to bring up the poster, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and it's based on the book by Robert Fulghum. And the first 3 points in that poster, I'm sure you've seen them in classrooms, is share everything, play fair, and don't hit people. And based on those 3 things, that's not something you can do in virtual learning. And the students in the kindergarten through 2nd grade cannot be expected to operate a computer on their own and will need a parent at home to assist them. Students in grades kindergarten through 2nd are not allowed to stay at home by themselves until they have to be 8 to do that. So a parent has to stay with them at home. Providing only virtual learning will mean job loss for many parents. Also, the children in these age groups cannot be expected to socially distance or wear masks per the CDC guidelines, so we shouldn't plan around it. The kindergarten through 2nd grade should operate like daycares, like my son is in right now. They isolate the classrooms and keep the students and teachers together in that room during the entire day. I think a hybrid plan is required so that teachers and students have the choice of either face-to-face learning or virtual. Providing this option will also reduce the amount of in-person learning in the classrooms and then help with the social distancing. So please consider providing the option for face-to-face learning for grades kindergarten through 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Kelly McDonald.
Good job.
Hi, tonight I am speaking as a citizen and an educator. I'm glad I don't have to make the decision that you are faced with, and I'm fairly certain that at least most of you want to do the right thing. I'm going to be straight up though. I've been concerned by recent statements and actions by some board members. I'm just going to remind you that this is supposed to be a nonpartisan body. And you literally have the lives of actual human beings in your hands, whether you believe that or not. In fact, I want to talk to you about the number of funerals you are going to attend if we go back to face in any capacity. The families you are going to have to shake hands with, knowing that this decision was in your hands. That's a lot to carry. The Carroll County fatality rate as of 7/15/2020, as documented by Johns Hopkins, is 9.48%. The state fatality rate is only 4.49%. The positivity rate in Carroll County for all residents is in the high 4s, which is higher than the 2.26% as documented by the Carroll County Health Department, Maryland State Health Department, because it discounts all of the deaths of people living in or working in elder care facilities. I'm sure none of those people or families believe that their lives should be discounted. However, for the sake of the conservatives in the back, I will even use the Carroll County Health Department statistics as I go further. I'm going to estimate that you have maybe 3,400 school-based employees, including your secretaries, admin, IAs, custodians, cafeteria workers, and educators. With an infection rate of 2.26%, which Governor Hogan tweeted Monday, that means you will have 77 employees test positive. Of those, 2 will die. Families will be devastated. You're going to have that on your shoulders. On the Carroll County Health Department website, they break down community cases by age. 5.7% of Carroll County's cases were actually between the ages of 10 to 19. That is our 4th to 12th graders. So this rhetoric that children do not get it is just not true. If 2.26% of our school population gets infected, and 5.7% of them are going to be between 10 to 19, then 28 kids are going to get it. One might die. Families will be devastated. Whole communities will be devastated. You will have that on your shoulders. That's a lot to carry, knowing you made that decision. And to be honest, there literally is no decision you're going to make that will make everyone happy. I do have a feeling, though, that the hybrid model is not going to make anyone happy. I wish you the best of luck. Please do the right thing and keep the politics out of it. Thank you.
I like the hybrid comment.
Sadly, it's not going to make anyone happy.
Next, we have Chuck Wisner.
Good evening. Thank you for listening to me. I've recorded myself so it's a little easier for you to go. I am an educator. Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I am Chuck Wisner, both a member of the community and a CCPS educator. I'm also a proud member of CCEA. I have lived in and had the privilege of teaching middle school for almost 30 years in Carroll County. I come out today, after 4 months of following Governor Hogan's Safer at Home advisory, to speak about a decision from this board which will affect me, my coworkers, my family, and my community. This board needs to weigh the long-term cost of this decision. I believe first and foremost the cost of hybrid opening will be measured in the negative impact to the health and to our community. In both Stage 1 and Stage 2 of the Maryland State Advisory, all Marylanders should continue wearing masks in indoor public areas, retail, and on public transportation. Your decision will mandate this idea in places like classrooms, hallways, bathrooms, media center, the cafeteria, and also on school buses. I believe someone will get infected from opening schools at this time. And if you believe, as I do, the cost of a hybrid opening is way too high. If we continue with the Maryland Department of Health's advisory, employers should continue to encourage telework from employees when possible, and people who can work from home should continue to do so. Do you remember what teachers did last year? Here at CCPS, we still need to be celebrating what was accomplished after the March 13th closing. Does everybody understand what happened? Our schools, they were completely reimagined and relaunched in a few short weeks. Google Classroom and the plethora of online tools became commonplace for our students. In real time, teachers were building the airplane while it was flying. This year, we will be prepared correctly for online schools. Educators have proven themselves flexible and able. Give us a correct start, an online start to the school year, and you will be amazed. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Stay safe and wear masks. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much. I hope the right decision is made by this board.
It was well done.
Right.
Thank you for being here
Thank you.
tonight.
Katie Kirby.
Hello, I'm Katie Kirby, Director of Together We Own It. I presented a proposal on behalf of Together We Own It at the last scheduled board meeting. Our proposal outlined our support for an equitable solution to distance learning. We detailed how we would play a role as a satellite learning location for children identified as at risk. Specifically, we hope to be a resource for those struggling with mental health whose only source of support was a traditional school day. As I mentioned in the previous meeting, the children we serve are often homeless, in foster care, facing abuse and neglect at home,
and exposed to substance use and violence regularly. Our students need more than access to a computer. They need relationships. They need trusted adults who are invested in their success. I want to be clear that I'm not here to advocate for the return to schools, but what I am here today to discuss is the critical role that small nonprofits and community partners will play in the return to school, whether virtual or in person. After reviewing the school system's drafted reopening and recovery plan, we noticed that much of what we hoped would be taken into consideration was included. However, we recognize that our organization is not leveraged as a support. You identify the Carroll County Public Library and the Boys and Girls Club as an optional space for learning for students. Together We Own It has a space with the capacity to serve 90 students and has offered to utilize that as an educational resource. I wonder if this will be considered as a viable option. Together We Own It is a thriving organization in our community. We are often referred to as the boots on the ground because of our drive to meet the needs of our neighbors right where they are, and our ability to build relationships with those who are often left out of critical decisions. We ask that you consider us to be a support for our students. We are able to be flexible and innovative and adapt to change quickly. When you work with Together We Own It, our staff and volunteers are emotionally committed to this work, and our only goal is to serve the needs of our children. Please be reminded that our students will need wraparound support to recover from the last 3 months of school. Many have fallen behind academically, and many are battling anxiety and depression as they navigate the new norm. Many parents will come before you and beg for you to reopen schools, providing statistics of the mental health decline of U.S. students. But this is not reason alone to jump back into a full school day. It is, however, reason enough to identify additional supports and partnerships for the upcoming school year. Recovery work is not the job of teachers alone, but will require community collaboration and support to not allow our students to fall through the cracks. Do your part and recognize Together We Own It and our coordinated support team as a viable alternative for those participating in enhanced distance learning. But more than that, recognize the hardships of our vulnerable students and what they've faced over the last 3 months of school, and put your foot down to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Tell us how we can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Up next is Vanessa Stewart.
Good evening. Thank you, board members and Dr. Lockard, for the opportunity to speak. I have lived in Carroll County my whole life. I've been teaching for 22 years in Carroll County Public Schools, but I'm also a parent to a 2019 graduate and a junior here in the local Westminster, well, Winners Mill, actually, high school. I've been watching the board meetings. I have read the drafts made public for tonight's meeting. And between the concerned parent representatives who spoke at the last meeting, the comments made by more board members, and what I've read in these drafts, I felt I had to come speak tonight. I keep hearing that we need to have these kids back in school for their social and emotional health, and they need the socialization. What socialization will they really be able to have? They have to stay 6 feet apart. They have to wear face coverings. They potentially have to stay behind plexiglass dividers. What's that going to do to a child's social emotional health to have to do that? At back to school night or on the first day of school, I don't know most of the precious young children coming into my room, and they don't know me. I begin with a smile on my face, and I put my hand out to shake their hand as we introduce ourselves. I learn a lot from that simple interaction. How am I going to do that when they won't be able to shake my hand or even get to see me smiling because my mouth is covered? What will they do, or what they will get, is lots of rules and redirection. It'll feel like they're a prison, and we're the prison guards. Please don't ask me to do that. They will not be able to sit knee to knee or elbow to elbow with a reading buddy or even their teacher. They won't have the opportunity to move from station to station to explore with different things that make sound because of cross-contamination. We can't comfort a crying child for fear that they may put ourselves or our family at risk. There will not be free time to run and play with their peers at recess time, their favorite time of the day. My job and my students are precious to me. Don't put me in a position where I could do more harm than I've already been done by this pandemic. You can ask any of the 23 students and parents I had this past year. When we went to digital learning, I worked day and night to be there for them from March to June. I spoke with each child and family, and safely from our homes, we met virtually. Could things have gone better? Absolutely. Was it frustrating and isolating? Yes. However, we were safe. Together with their parents, we made it work. We worked as a team to do the best that we could. In their homes, they can play, they can touch, they don't have to put on a mask. Instead of spending 7.5 hours with no play or touch and wearing a mask. Please allow us to start the year virtually. Let's put the remaining time that we have left toward making sure we can do everything in our power to make the virtual experience better for teachers and parents. For starters, I suggest, instead of thousands spent on hand sanitizer dispensers, PPE, signage, and plexiglass, let's use the savings, as well as the savings of having our school buildings closed.
Excuse me, could you just please finish your thoughts, and you can leave any information with us.
I have one sentence left.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
So with that savings of the school buildings closed, as well as that other savings, we could put it towards a Chromebook for each student to take, so that all the troubleshooting of the different device issues that we've had out of the equation, and every child will have their own device, and they will no longer have to be sharing devices in the home. Thank you again for this time.
Thank you so much, Joelle. Next, we have Ida Franklin. The exit's right there, ma'am. Thank you.
I have some handouts that you can get later. Respected members of the Board of Education, I'm here today because as a veteran music teacher of 30 years and representing my fellow colleagues as special area teachers, I have some major concerns about the newly released plan. I'm a teacher, but I'm also the main caregiver for my 72-year-old mother who suffers from Lyme disease, COPD, and emphysema. I myself also have asthma at 53. This puts me in a high-risk group as well. After reading the 50-page document that was released yesterday, I was very disappointed to find that special area classes weren't even mentioned. I have given you a document that you can look at that was shared with me from another teacher in Maryland. I'm presenting this with her permission. And when you look at this, you'll see the top graphic is for a classroom teacher who has a class of 25 students. And after 1 week, her exposure is to 25 students. However, as a special area teacher, on day 1, we may see 25 students. One class is 25 students. Day 1, we may have 125 students. Maybe by the end of the week, depending on the school population, we will have 625 students that we have been exposed to, therefore making your special area teachers the super spreaders of the school. I am by no means saying that I don't want to teach my students in person. As a music teacher, it's going to be a lot of work to do this virtually. It's going to take a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. However, I don't believe that with all of the students coming either to our classroom or us traveling to another classroom, we can possibly be safe. There's no doubt that I believe students need this in-person instruction, but at what cost? I have to ask myself, am I willing to risk my life, my mom's life, the health of the rest of my family, and, as a super spreader, the rest of my students? As the sole provider for my mom, I have no choice, and I'm at the mercy of the system even though I can retire. That, in and of itself, is a crippling concern and burden. I have some things to ask, that the board consider delaying in-person instruction until proper PPE materials and procedures have not only been decided but put into practice. That during the virtual learning period, teachers and staff receive proper training so that the risk is lowered for all teachers, students, staff, and school families. That teachers be involved in the reopening plan. It's the teacher who knows exactly what challenges will be presented to them in the classroom. That high-risk teachers be provided with protection that will considerably lower their risk, such as plexiglass barriers, masks, and face shields. That the school system also set up a way for teachers to enforce the mask wearing of all students. There's no doubt I want to go back to in-person instruction. But make no mistake,
The virtual system requires hours and hours of extra planning and preparation, which I am willing to put in so that our family can be safe. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I never know. All right, next we have Jill Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all. I come before you once again to express my concern with the virtual learning and the fact that the current plan does not address 100% back to school on a normal schedule. The enhanced virtual learning, again, it's not live, it's not their regular schedule. That's not healthy for the children. Stage 2, the hybrid model. Again, it's not their regular schedule. It's not 100% in school. These plans appear to appease political, teachers' unions, etc., putting our children second or even last. They do not address and put our children first. We have had 4 months now to prepare our schools, our buses, our classrooms for the worst case scenario. I've heard a lot of teachers speak about how they're going to stage their classrooms, how many kids they can fit in their classrooms. Why haven't we planned that already? We've had 4 months to plan the worst case scenario. And now we have a month and a half left. So, what's the plan? Get additional trailers outside. Engage the community. Do all these things to ensure that our kids are coming back 100%. Clean every night. I saw on the June 8th distribution, we're cleaning on Wednesday. Why aren't we deep cleaning every night? We should be deep cleaning every night and making sure our schools are sanitized for the teachers and the students, period. Yes, it's additional cost, but the cost of our children's education is worth more. We need to come together and ensure our children get a proper education. Although it is hard for children to wear a mask, my children have been doing it for 4 months now. I understand it's going to be harder for the little ones, but we need to mandate it, period, to protect our teachers and the other students. Yes, it'll be hard, but if parents right now work with their kids and prepare their kids and make it not an option, mandate it in their households, mandate it when they go out, they can start to help prepare their children to wear a mask full-time at school. We need to keep the politics out of it. We need to think of our students. We need to get them back to school. This is not healthy. The past 4 months has not been healthy for them at all. It's been very difficult. So the current plan will require me to hire a teacher on those days that my children are virtual learning. My husband and I both work full-time. We've worked this entire time. We've worked the past 4 months. That's not right. That's not an education. That's clicking a box and finishing an assignment. I urge you all to do the right thing for our kids in our community and put them first. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Have a jolly week.
And next we have Matt Coulter.
That's more than 15. Are we
I know.
almost done?
We and have 2. And that's
Two
it.
more?
Yep, that's it. Yep, we have additional 2. They came and we're going to do it.
Yeah, sure. How's it going, everyone? My name is Matt Coulter, resident of Carroll County, and you know what you're seeing right here is actually kind of the definition of what distance learning really is. You know, it's one of the parents staying home, missing work, watching the youngest kid who's still not in school, and then the other ones just looking at the iPad and trying to figure something out. I work in construction as a government contractor, and so we've been working this whole time, And it's because we're considered essential. And in my mind, those that are the most essential are our educators and the teachers that teach our children. And they're who I've always viewed as heroes. And I'm asking myself right now, why aren't they being a hero for our children? Why aren't they stepping up to the challenge? Is it the ideal situation? No, but they have an opportunity to shine right now, and shine during a pandemic and bring hope to those that have lost all hope. So that's all that I had to say. Calvin, did you want to say something real quick?
Could I step on you?
Sure.
I'm a student in a class and I really miss school, so students like me probably miss school a lot, and online learning is not our favorite. We want to be with our friends and have like a teacher to learn with, and our families, family, not friends, and also I gotta be honest, online learning is not that fun, and yeah.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
What was your name, hon? Calvin.
Calvin.
Thanks,
Thank
Calvin.
you so much, Calvin, for speaking to me.
And next we have Holly Berry, our last speaker,
Good job, thanks. Good job, Calvin.
citizen participation speaker.
I brought you handouts. These handouts are my letter and then a survey that I'm going to talk to you about. I did email the survey to Ken Kyler. Hopefully I timed this out right for you guys. My name is Holly Berry, and I am the owner and operator of Berry Patch Early Learning Center in Hampstead, Maryland. Berry Patch has been open throughout COVID-19 pandemic, with one closing due to one positive case. At the onset of the virus, Berry Patch had 97 children attending. When the EPCC program began, we were reduced by 50%, approximately 45 children and 20 employees. We have worked closely with the Carroll County Health Department and our MSDE Office of Child Care licensing specialists to be responsible, proactive, and continually learn how to keep our children, families, and staff safe. This was a group effort by a respectful clientele and dedicated staff. Throughout the ever-changing data, closures, lifestyle adjustments, our staff was always a week or two ahead of whatever was coming. We had to close rooms, move children to different classrooms and to different teachers, reduce and eliminate furnishings and toys, develop heightened cleaning, disinfecting, and sanitizing protocols. All of these efforts were achieved by a positive staff and supportive families. Our children transitioned well because our staff and families worked together to build an environment that we could all be comfortable in. I am asking the Board of Education to use our experiences to help make this upcoming school year less challenging for the teachers, students, administration, and support staff. As an early childhood education community, we have already and are currently living your dilemma, just in a smaller scale. We can help provide insight and share our experiences with your administration, teachers, and support staff. We have ideas that have not been presented, and unfortunately, in 3 minutes, I can't convey that information. I am asking that the Board of Education create a subcommittee with child care center owners who have been on the front lines so that we can transition and as seamlessly as possible create an environment that is not only educational but safe for everyone involved. I participated in a Teams meeting on Monday, July 13th, discussing the CCPS community survey, staffing and available space within the child care setting, technology, and the support that we need from CCPS. I have spoken with a few North Carroll child care owners, and we have joined together to brainstorm to help find creative, honest, and friendly ideas that will meet the needs of our CCPS teachers, students, and families. We believe that we have some ideas that you need to hear before making a steadfast decision that will affect not only the jobs of your teachers and staff, but the families who live in our communities. I have attached a Survey Monkey, it's up here, analysis of a small North Carroll population of elementary school families expressing their needs for CCPS and childcare and responses to two important questions. Please take the time to read this survey data. The key comments are, virtual learning this past spring did not work.
Thank you. If you could just finish up your thoughts,
Yes.
please.
Cannot afford childcare expenses, children need to be in school, and masks not to be worn all day. I believe this survey allowed families to voice their concerns in a neutral environment with the hopes that they will be understood. I know that together, as organizations under MSDE, we can work together for the betterment of all Carroll County citizens. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did get the email. It won't let me forward it now, but I'll forward it to everybody, so you have it electronically also.
And now we move on to our employee groups, and I think we just have one tonight. Teresa, you'll exit out the door there on the to your right. Teresa McCullough from CCEA.
Good evening. I am Teresa Basler McCullough, President of the Carroll County Education Association, representing teachers, RNs, counselors, speech and language providers, OTs, PTs, who many are scared, worried, anxious, and stressed out. There is nothing more important than students wanting to reunite with their fellow classmates, friends, and to see their teachers in their classrooms. There is nothing more important than educators wanting to interact with and teach their students in their classrooms. There is nothing more important than educators wanting to deliver instruction in one method. There is nothing more important than educators with school-age children resolving daycare issues. There is nothing more important than educators with compromised conditions or living with a family member in a vulnerable health condition, wanting to know their option depending on the recovery plan. The health and safety of every person within a brick and mortar building must be the top priority. The health and safety of every person within a brick and mortar building must be the top priority. Consider starting the school year virtually and get it right. We build upon what was done the last 3.5 months of the last school year, making distance learning improvements, and everybody stays safe. And we then look at the matrices and transition into in-person learning when it's safe. A perfect solution does not exist. A safe one does. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is the end of our comments for the evening.
And Ms. Herbert, there's no one else that had shown up to sign up yet tonight?
That is it. That is all.
Okay, great. All right, then we can move on to the action items. We have one item to work through tonight, so board members need a motion for the approval of personnel appointment.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Dorsey, seconded by Ms. Battaglia. Dr. Locker, do you want to walk us through that?
Thank you, board members. We do have one item, and we've typically been trying to keep our update meetings sort of separate from our business meetings, but the timeliness of this is important, and we want to move it forward, so it should only take a moment. We are recommending the appointment of Rebecca Tesh, who is currently a RN at Manchester Valley High School, to the Coordinator of Health Services position. If you remember when we approved our adopted budget just a couple of months ago, we recognized the need for some support in health services. I think based on all the conversation and the situation we're in tonight, we know that that is a very important additional component to the supports that we can provide our schools, our students, and our families. And so I'm pleased this evening to recommend Rebecca Tesh to Coordinator of Health Services for your consideration and approval.
Board members, any questions or comments?
A quick question, and as much for the public as for me. This position is newly created. Who does it report to?
So I will start, and then Ms. McCabe, if you need to jump in and help me, you can. But the coordinator reports directly to the Supervisor of Health Services, which is Philippa Gomes.
Dr. Lockard, like you said, this is the newly created position, so this will create a vacant position for an additional registered nurse that we would need to bring into the system.
Correct. Another reason we wanted to do it sooner rather than later.
Board members, any other questions? No? All right, then with that, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, can I get a verbal aye, please?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, and that brings us up to item number 4 under discussion, and the only item that we have is the COVID-19 impact updates. I'm sure that it will take us quite some time to get through that one.
The only item we have.
The only item we have. So with that, Dr. Lockard, I know that there was a draft update plan. It's about a 50-page plan that was submitted to board members in advance and was also submitted to the public. So if you'd like to just kind of open up the meeting and touch on the highlights, and then I'm sure, I know that we have many comments as board members and questions that we'd like to discuss and go through with you and staff.
Yep, I appreciate that, Ms. Savigny. Good evening, everybody. That is the purpose tonight. We want to really spend some time diving into all of the questions, all of the issues surrounding where we currently are, what our potential options are, and best unpacking that and understanding that. I'm going to ask, if we can, on the screen, and I don't know if Mr. O'Neill, you're in control of that, or if it's Mr. Flaherty, but I want to just kind of talk through a couple things here. We'll go to the first slide. Tonight, we hope to accomplish several things. Most importantly is to get the chance for conversation with the board. We are not here to be making final decisions this evening, and we'll go over our timeline again later on in the presentation. But the idea was tonight to really, again, dive into these things, ask a lot of questions, have a lot of conversation, better understand, and in the process communicating, I think, what are many of the questions the public has been asking. And I recognize and appreciate all of the emails and questions, public comment this evening that we're receiving. Please know that we do get all of that. We do read all of that. Sometimes it's hard for us to respond to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, a day, a week. But please know that they are being added to that growing list that we've been accumulating as we work through these complex decisions. So we will be talking a little bit about just our required guidance. We do have requirements, and we'll do a quick review of the K-12 decision matrix and our own crosswalk with that. An update on the planning process from the last meeting. So here we are bringing a draft of some of the potential options available. We've had stakeholder feedback. We will be talking about another community and employee and student survey that will be going out this week. And then some next steps in our planning process timeline and so forth. So, Mr. Rooney, if you go to the next slide for me, please. I'm not going to go through each one of these. We've referenced these in the past, but as we've been working over these last 3 months in earnest, really the first month was sort of calibrating ourselves to being closed and getting distance learning, continually working on that, at the same time starting to shift to longer term. We've been utilizing the guidance available to us. I'm not going to go through all this guidance. It is interwoven within our plans and our thinking, and we have linked it in the plan. That includes Maryland MSDE's guidance. That's the second one there, the Recovery Plan for Education. Certainly the governor's roadmap to recovery, CDC considerations, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance as well. I want to note, as one of the speakers said this evening, guidance continues to evolve. New information continues to emerge. And so we are trying to be as nimble and incorporating that as it becomes available or as it evolves as well. Next slide, please, Mr.
Can I?
Yes, sir.
One question on that. And I understand, and I love the public comment, and everybody's passionate, but and I feel for their frustrations, but a few comments were like, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? And I think you kind of said it, but this has been a moving target, will continue to be a moving target, and I think Carroll County Public Schools wants to do the most possible they can do for the students, and so we're kind of hoping for the next decision to maybe open things up, but if it doesn't happen, you've got a plan.
That's correct, Mr. Kyler. We have had to plan for all the contingencies because if anybody has that crystal ball, let me know. But we don't know exactly what the stage is going to be. And we are required in certain stages to do certain things and not do certain things.
Dr. Lackert, I know we were in a meeting and all that, but I know the governor had a talk today. Did anybody get back from anybody? Did they say anything about education?
Right. So we were in a meeting during that press conference today. Right. I have not received any updates from anybody significant to reopening of schools. It could be that it was discussed, Ms. Herbert, but I have not received that, and I've been trying to make sure I'm focused.
I've heard one thing, and that's that Dr. Scanlon will be addressing the educational piece next week. I don't think she was available. I don't think anything was shared concerning the educational planning. Other than to say that some systems have moved forward with coming up with their plans, but I don't think Dr. Salmon will be addressing the state until next week, is my understanding.
Okay, Dr. Dorsey, was that the 22nd that she'll be speaking, or was it just next week?
I just heard next week.
Okay.
And again, I just got that quickly, so I didn't get any other specifics than that.
Okay, thank you for that.
I was just hoping we might had a little more guidance today.
That would be good, right?
Right.
That would be.
And just one other clarification. I know, I appreciate everyone who showed up tonight for citizen participation. I can't thank them enough for coming in and giving us their comments. There were a lot, like you said, Mr. Kyler, of why haven't you done this, why haven't you done that, and there were some comments that I believe that there's still some misunderstanding in the public. There was one comment like, why isn't there an option to come back 100% traditional regular right now? And the answer right now is that we are under phase 2 for the reopening of the state of Maryland, and we are not allowed. That is not permitted.
That's correct.
Under the current setup. Now, if we were to move to phase 3 before September 8th, that would be a possibility. But we are planning for that, and I'm sure we'll get to that later on in the discussion, but we have different ideas and different thoughts, and we'll be sending out a survey to get people's thoughts, the community's thoughts on what should we be doing in a phase 2 scenario and what should we be doing in a phase 3 scenario. So I wanted to address some of those things that we heard, that if we do have an answer for why haven't you done that, I wanted to make sure that we kind of point that out, that our hands are a little bit tied still, or our hands are a lot tied.
Yes.
While the state is still in phase 2.
I appreciate you making that point. And like we said, as the guidance evolves and changes as well, not just the stages, but that certainly impacts, pieces of our planning or our thinking. So on the next slide, I really wanted to just reiterate, this is right out of MSDE's, guidance, and it is their Maryland Together Recovery Plan for Education, and that is that the governor's office, in coordination with lots of folks around the state, are monitoring those key health metrics, and they're the ones that identify the appropriate stage with Maryland's Roadmap to Recovery, and then, as we were referencing, our state superintendent, in consultation with the state board, subsequently determines the operational status of schools within each stage. So, to your point, Mrs. Savigny, that's not me, and that's not us as a board, that's not local boards of education. Those are some of the requirements or things that we have to work within as they happen. So we don't control when schools are closed or open. Our board didn't close the schools in March, and I won't, and I can't, and you can't either decide what stage we're in for opening either. So that's to your point there, just to make sure we're clear. And here's the chart right out of the documentation there. And stage 1, which we all experienced back in the spring, where everything was conducted fully online. Stage 2 that we're currently in, that's the yellow you see there, that allows for some in-person activities, and it has to be in accordance with all those things that we've talked about, the governor's executive orders, the social distancing measures, the best practice and recommendations of all the various things that we referenced at the beginning of this document, as well as our consultation with Maryland and local health departments. And then finally, in stage 3, we want to get there as soon as we're able to. Everybody does. And that is the goal. That's the target, so that in-person activities may fully resume. Schools can begin normal operations. There may be consistent or some additional safety measures that would have to go with that, but all of us would take that at this point, right? So we would like to be there. So with that, I wanted to make sure we did that review and recognize that we have to follow those requirements. We have to work within. That's why we're trying to bring different scenarios so that depending on what stage we're in, what stage Maryland is in, we're able to move between. We can be nimble and shift between those stages. Again, the goal is to get the green, right? Get to stage 3, but we have to be prepared. And right now we have to be prepared to operate within stage 2. And so tonight is about talking about what the options are there, fully vetting those. We'll be putting out another survey like we talked about, getting more feedback from our parents, from our employees, from our students, because things change all the time. And so the last survey we did 5 weeks ago, there might be different information out now. Well, there is, and people might have different input to provide. We worked really hard to listen to all the feedback to provide a better, more applicable, I think, survey to fully capture that data. We hope, like I said, the goal is to have that out by today's Wednesday, by Friday at the latest, so that folks have time to give feedback on that.
And Dr. Lockhart, I think it's a really good point that a lot of things have changed in the last 5 weeks, and we will be sending out a new survey. I think one of the other things to point out is that 5 weeks ago, we didn't really have a skeleton of a plan, so we were putting out a survey trying to get folks' feelings about coming back to in-person learning or staying in virtual learning when we didn't have any specifics about a plan. And as we're kind of narrowing in on what some of those specifics are, we're going to plan to go out and get additional feedback along the way. So there's a lot less uncertainty, a lot less confusion about what we're really asking people as we add more and more specifics to the plan.
I appreciate you referencing that. If you remember, about 5 weeks ago, maybe a little less than that, the state was still getting feedback for their plan. sorry, I've written all over this one, but for Maryland Recovery Plan, they were still vetting with all sorts of stakeholder groups, all kinds of input and feedback. And so while our wheels were churning and we were thinking, we still didn't actually have that updated guidance at that point. So appreciate that fact. Folks have been working incredibly hard. And, you know, real-time information as it changes is relevant every day to us as we think about this. So with that, Mr. O'Neill, do you want to move to the next slide and talk about step 2?
Yes, sir. I hope my mic's on.
Yep.
We can hear you.
Oh, great. Now I have control of the presenter as well. So just a couple more slides by way of background in terms of how the state impacts our planning, and then we'll get into the discussion of our draft plan itself. This next slide, it continues in a series from the MSD, or Maryland State Department of Ed, decision matrix that Dr. Locker's been referring to, and it just sort of reiterates the point that you've been making, President Savigny, that when Maryland gets to stage 2, which is where we are now, that's really where boards of ed, local boards of ed, you and the other 23 have to develop a plan for what our school system would look like. So really our plan and every plan around the state focuses in on what would we do in stage 2. And we'll say this now and many, many more times on the slides to follow. Your choices really are either a hybrid model, which is what we've sort of been talking about, some form of some students returning on any given day, or continuing with a virtual instruction program like we were in the spring, although we believe, you know, we've learned some things in virtual program to be enhanced as we move forward. So really the whole plan is about that, about the state being in stage 2, and whether we're looking at virtual and or a hybrid model. And the bullets on the screen that you see, they really go back to the slide that Dr. Lockhart had where we listed the guidance documents from the state. These are some of the required things that MSDE has in its Maryland Together plan that all local boards of ed must have considered and have incorporated into our plan. And then the last step 3 in the decision matrix from the state just reaffirms that, you know, these are the plans we have to develop, really, if there's going to be some hybrid model and what that would look like. And I guess maybe big here for those in the public, we get so much feedback. Sometimes the feedback is very, very broad, and sometimes it's statements like, you should just open, or, you know, don't worry so much about the state, just open. Kind of the big takeaway from this part of the state's decision matrix is that local boards of ed may be more restrictive than what's in the state plan, but not less restrictive. So if they don't say you can open, you can open. Now you could be hybrid or you could be virtual, but you can't go beyond what the state is saying can occur in that given stage, in stage 2. So that's how we've been working with Dr. Lockhart to come up with the draft plan that you now have and that much of the public now has. We've talked about these things, so I don't want to repeat each one. We have to plan within those guidelines. Very often the state guidelines, those documents rely on CDC guidelines, and so largely we've looked at CDC guidelines or the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines. As we just said, we can be more restrictive than the guidelines, but not less restrictive than them. And there's also a timeline, and we've had the timeline back at the first meeting. It's later, the timeline itself is later in this presentation, but we and every local board of ed in Maryland must adopt a plan, and we must have that plan to the state and posted on our own website locally for the public by a certain date in August. So the whole timeline we laid out, or Dr. Lockhart laid out a few weeks ago, sort of works to get us there. And I'll just say here, too, we'll probably say this a couple more times as we go through, it is important to have the plan and to be comfortable with it, regardless of what stage we're in. So even if the governor had come out today and said, hey, great news, Maryland's in stage 3 and schools could open, there's always the chance that we would have an exposure in a school, or that, you know, maybe the numbers change, God forbid, and the state reverts back a stage. We'd have to have this plan approved and ready to be implemented in those scenarios as well. So I think it's important that we bear that in mind, that we need to we need to sort of have the plan and all of its parts and protocols in place. The next slide is something that really Dr. Lockard took the lead on. This is not, what you're about to see as I step through this, is not from one of the state documents. This is in our plan. So it's a graphic that Dr. Lockard asked us to work on, and really we worked with him to create. And it's our best attempt at a visual crosswalk between where Carroll County Public Schools would operate relative to each state stage in the state plans. And so in stage one, that's where we would automatically be virtual or distance learning. And again, we believe we would be better at it today, and that we're trying to make improvements, and our folks are getting better at it, and that we have more tools available. But that's sort of where we were in March when the state superintendent closed all of Maryland's public schools. That was stage one, and so we were in the virtual mode then. Maryland has moved to stage two, and we're talking all about planning. And to make this point again and again, that means you as a local Board of Ed at stage two could be in a hybrid model. We know we can't bring all of our students back at one time in stage two. That would only happen in stage three, but we could bring our students back in some manner on a less than 100% basis per day, and have a hybrid operating model. Or also, because we can be more but not less restrictive per the state, this is also a place where a virtual model can exist. And in our plan, they can exist side by side in stage two. And Mr. Anderson and Ms. McCabe will go over all of that in much more detail as we go through this presentation. And then lastly, stage three would be the point where the governor and the state superintendent would say schools can reopen in a more traditional model. Now, there might be certain restrictions if required by public health officials. Some things with distancing, masks, perhaps, we don't know. That's just a speculation. But in general, stage three is when we could return to open schools in a more traditional model. So if you like this graphic and find it helpful, then much credit to Dr. Lockard, who wanted to create it. And this does.
And if you don't like it,
well. Can I, while you're on this slide, the very last bubble on the right in the bottom, stage three, requires no board approval if the governor and the state superintendent say that. I think for whatever reason, there's people very scared, and if the governor would have announced today we're in stage three and we can open, I think we're still going to hear an outcry that we shouldn't. What truly are the options if we get to that? And if it's going to be covered better later, let that go. But I'd kind of like everybody to understand that's technically, if we get to stage three and they say open the schools, we don't sit here and debate it. We open the schools.
Correct. And that's a great question, Mr. Collar. And I think now's as good a time as any to get as clear as we can on this point. You can always be more restrictive, presumably. And so if the governor declares Maryland in stage three and the state superintendent says schools could reopen, what that bubble meant to us, I suppose, when we constructed it is the Board of Ed of Carroll County does not need to walk out publicly and take a formal action and say, we now declare our schools open. They could automatically open in that scenario with the state moving to stage three. That doesn't mean that you couldn't also say, well, let's try to have a virtual option available. Let's try to have some other more restrictive things in place for some families who want that. There are some complications in pulling that off, and we're going to talk about what some of those complications would be. But if the governor declares the state in stage three and the state superintendent says, I declare Maryland schools now reopen, you don't have to also then do something on your own. You would follow suit that your schools could be open with that declaration. I think it's sort of the counterpoint to something Dr. Lockard said earlier. He can't close our schools in the way in which they were closed, and neither can you. That was Dr. Salmon, the state superintendent, who came out in March and said, I declare all of Maryland public schools closed. Then the governor and the state superintendent also would would be the folks who declare the schools reopened under stage 3. Did that make sense to your question?
Yes, thanks.
It did, John, and thank you for that clarification, because I think one of the things that we also want to recognize is even if the state does go to a stage 3 and we could be open for a full traditional return in September, that we still probably need to think through some options, because we are going to have some high-risk groups of students, some high-risk groups of employees that we need to be thinking about that situation and potentially provide them with options as well.
Correct. And I think that's coming up in great detail with Mr. Anderson and Ms. McCabe as we move through this. And that's complicated and complex, and they'll do a better job in a few slides than I could. But I think it'll be a good conversation, and everyone will start to understand how, how very challenging this sort of a planning process is. And that's where we're poised to go. If you're okay to move forward, we're going to get...
John, I have a question before we move forward.
Sure.
If it was possible in stage 2, if we had the room, or if any school system or school had the room, could all the students go back? If there was social distance, if they had all the restrictions? Are we in stage 2 and it's a hybrid model because it's impossible to have all the students coming back?
I think that's a great question. That's a complex question, Commissioner. I think the theoretical answer is yes, if we had room, but also other things like staffing and logistics and transportation, then theoretically, if you could space everyone out and have teachers in those rooms for every kid by certification area and so forth and so on, then theoretically in stage 2 you could, I'm not saying this to be flip, if you could somehow kind of wave a magic wand and basically double the size of your school system, then you probably...
Right, I understand, but I was asked that question. I didn't know what the answer was, so I thought I'd ask it this evening. But thank you.
Sure. It's the restrictions and the strain on resources that that kind of set the parameters as to how that can operate. And again, that's something else we'll be getting into again tonight with I think much more detail than we could back at the June meeting. So this brings us to our draft plan, the Carroll County Public Schools Reopening and Recovery Plan, and we're going to go through it kind of in a broad view and then narrow right down into the big sections. But that plan is now a public document. It's published as part of this agenda. We'll cover this again later, but Ms. Gaddis will be also sending it out to the public at large. It has been forwarded in advance to the representative stakeholder groups that have been identified as feedback for this process, and many of them have already processed it and have been sending in a lot of good feedback. It does include all of the required state components that were on the prior slides. We've been sure to incorporate all of those required areas into the plan. Doesn't mean everyone will agree with the plan, and we know that, but it does cover the required sections. And again, we've said this many times now, but basically the whole plan focuses on what can happen in stage 2, not so much in stage 1 or stage 3. A general overview of the plan before we get into the sections. Again, it's all about stage 2. It does include a virtual option in stage 2 as well as a modified in-person instructional option. Mr. Anderson is going to get into that on the next slide, and then again many times after that. The plan defines some school administration protocols, how our school is going to run and operate, and what's that going to look like. The plan defines our system operational and safety protocols, and we'll talk about the level at which it defines them when we get to those sections as we present the plan. The other thing I said, a lot of us and a lot of you have made reference to the fact that it's 50 pages, and I'm not sure if that was a good reference or bad reference or not, but we do understand that it's 50 pages, and we hope that that's a reflection of the amount of work and effort that's gone into it, in the research, in the time, in the study. That being said, it's not necessarily, I think, at the end, meaning once it's adopted and once we begin to operate, it's not necessarily meant to be a document that you would read from start to finish. It's hopefully more of a reference for staff and students and the public to consult. And so in that sense, if you see it in the PDF format and you get to the table of contents, you can click on those links and jump around. So even though it's a lengthy document, we're hoping that it serves more as a reference and something you consult, not as a good read at your week at the beach this summer if you get to go.
John, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Now, I know right now individual counties can state like what type of level they are in as well, and I don't know if Mr. Frazier wants to answer this either or not, but could the county dictate, I mean not dictate, but state how we are allowed to proceed based on how they are proceeding regarding stages and phases or?
If Commissioner Frazier wants to answer that, he certainly can feel free. One of the key stakeholders that we do consult is Mr. Singer and his team at the health department, and so I think that's a great question, Ms. Battaglia, and I think the answer could be that would be true either at a county or system level, but even at a school level. So if we as a state and even a county remain in stage 2, but something occurred at a given school in the school year, then those conversations with Mr. Singer don't just occur at these meetings. They occur probably to the point that he grimaces when his phone rings and it's somebody from the school system. But that consultation will always be happening. Okay. And so if the number changes and the situation changes, then we would be taking his advice and bringing that forward to you all. But I also think to your point, it could be not so much just only a county-wide situation, but perhaps possibly a school-based situation. And we have some examples later in this presentation where we would give some of what those examples could be.
I think it's good to point out because sometimes I know Montgomery County is still considered like in the beginning of stage 2 or Baltimore City, like they're not where Carroll County is. So in the event that something were to occur, the county could change a different direction, that could change a couple different things. Even though the state is one area, the county could be in a different one. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand either, I mean, if something like that were to occur.
Carroll County is fully in stage 2. We're completely in stage 2 in all aspects. We have the ability to be more restrictive than what the state is, but we do not have the ability to go beyond what the state is mandating. So state is in stage 2, we cannot move to stage 3. We don't have that ability. We can be more restrictive but not less, but we are fully in stage 2 right now.
And the same would be true probably from Mr. Singer and an individual school and all the examples you said. We can get tougher, but we can't lighten it up. We can't make it less restrictive.
Right.
John, I just want to make one other comment on something you referenced, the plan being 50 pages. This plan, probably is a lot more depth than the 50 pages you see here. We reference a lot of guidance and a lot of links to things, so there's a lot more complexity, and we'll get into some of that a little bit later on. We tried to be concise in this draft to hit on the larger, most important points we could, but please understand, not making it a 9,000-page document, there's a lot of depth beneath everything you see here as it relates to the complexities and challenges that each component of the plan bring.
I think that's a good point to make, Dr. Lockard, too. I mean, as we read through the document itself, there's not necessarily a ton of detail in there of exactly how we would open up under a hybrid model, right? What is listed there is all the considerations that need to be taken into account in order to open up under a hybrid model. So, but as you said, there's links to all kinds of other references saying this is the recommended protocol, stuff like that. But if the public is going into this document thinking that it's going to answer all their questions for every single procedural thing that we would be doing under a hybrid model, that's not here. So I think we need to just make sure folks understand that aspect of it as well.
Right.
So after we approve this plan in the end, will more specific guidelines be made available to the public?
I think to the public and to different stakeholder groups, and your question and President Savigny's point are both great. They're going to be touched on in a couple of slides, although I recognize where we're headed. A couple of slides could possibly be, an hour from now. So I'll say that we get that not every question is answered in here, whether those are employee questions or parent questions or student questions. And if we tried to, it would be hundreds of pages, not 50, and it would be really cumbersome. But all of those communications and clarifications, hopefully, and we know that there will be things that come up that none of us could possibly think of, but to the extent we can, those clarifications will happen in addition to this plan. So, for some examples, employees who have questions about leave procedures relative to COVID-19. Well, we have lots of human resources procedures on how employees would take leave. Those procedures would need to be updated as their own human resources procedures, and there will need to be some articulation with their employee groups and certainly communication with their employees. The same with individual duties and assignments. The same with protocols, whether that's protocols in the nursing suites or protocols in building operations. We have a lot of existing protocols. Those might need to be adjusted relative to or specific to the pandemic, and then all of that would be disseminated to all of the people who need to see that. The list goes on and on and on and on, and maybe that's the point that President Savigny was making. Emergency drills and all of that will be a little bit different in a hybrid model, and all of that needs to get communicated out. And I don't want to put schools on the spot, but I would assume that there will be a more than a typical year type of back-to-school communications from schools to parents and thus to the students and families saying, here's a whole lot of things that everyone needs to think about and practice as we start the school year. So we know that not everything's going to be in the plan in terms of answering every question, but we do hope that we answer those operational concerns in our procedures or in our other guidelines, and that all of that gets communicated well, if not communicated too much, even in a scenario like this.
I think we need to, you heard a lot of anxiety from groups of teachers that were here tonight in citizen participation. I think we need to involve the teachers in the reopening of their own classrooms. Like, they need to understand, like, they're going to know some of the realities of their own classroom, and they're going to need to understand, how do I actually get back in a hybrid model and follow the appropriate protocol if there's that much of it? I certainly understand their concerns.
Right. And so, President Savigny, what we believe would happen, and we're certainly open to other suggestions, is now that the draft plan's out there, and we know that it will be revised as we move forward, but now that it's out there, we'll find time and ways to have, just to use your example, follow-up articulation with our employee units, to sit down with their leadership or with their committees they put together and try to say, okay, we have your questions, here's what we believe some of the answers will be. And so at a broad level, try to address those concerns and answer those questions. But at a specific school level, that's the kind of communication that's going to come from school administrations each year. And it happens each year. This is certainly a different year and a different scenario, but principals would then send messages to staff to talk about locations and assignments and when to arrive and what the process will be and so forth and so on. So that's kind of how we see the layers working themselves out into operations and communication and information going out below the level of the plan. So other things there, or move on? Move on. We're getting to the plan itself now. Just some remaining overview points. these are some sort of the major updates since the last time we met with you formally. I'm going to hit these bullets real fast, and Cindy and Jason are going, or I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson and Ms. McCabe are going to take over and begin to talk very much about the hybrid model that's in the plan at this point. So one of the big changes is we do now have the plan. We've already shared that. One of the other big changes since our first conversation with you, that night we spoke a lot about believing we would be at a 25% of students attending on a given day. This plan is based on 50% of students attending on a given day, and so that's certainly a major shift. This is something I'm sure we've talked about, but it's clearly spelled out here, and Mr. Anderson will go into detail explaining that there is a virtual option in stage 2 for any family who's not comfortable with their student attending in person. And we had a good bit of conversation about transportation last time, where we've settled for what appeared in the draft plan is we're looking at 1 student per seat on the bus with masks for all students, or at least for those students who are medically able to wear masks. So those are the big things. And then Mr. Anderson and Ms. McCabe, if you wanted to discuss the hybrid model.
Excuse me, John, I do have one question, and I made light of this last time. It says pupil transportation plans for 1 child per seat, but if siblings then cannot sit with each other?
Oh no, that's still the case, Ms. Herbert. I'm sorry. And in the plan,
because I thought that's just another wasted seat. I'm just thinking of trying to,
Right. And that's one of the caveats that's actually somewhere in here. I read it.
Because that's what when I saw that, and I'm thinking, no, wait a minute, I thought I read somewhere else that, okay, I just want to make sure.
That's absolutely a good catch, and it is in the transportation protocol in the
That's what worried me. Okay, I thought I was right, but then I thought, I'm going to ask. Okay.
Very, very good, very good. I thought I could escape and give this over to Jason and Cindy, but you.
No.
So let's get into the hybrid model a little bit. In this model, we would break the students into 2 cohorts, cohort A and cohort B. In our plan, we suggested that we do a pattern of AB space AB, which would mean cohort A on Monday would be in school, while cohort B would be at home learning virtually. On Tuesday, cohort B would be in school, while cohort A was at home learning virtually. On Wednesday, both cohorts would be at home in virtual learning while the building was cleaned and sanitized. And then on Thursday and Friday, we would repeat Monday and Tuesday, which would mean cohort A would be in school on Thursday and cohort B would be in school on Friday. We got feedback, a lot of feedback from our stakeholder groups and from the community at large, asking for an AA space BB instead of what we have here. Both patterns have pros and cons, but the real pro of having cohort A come to school on Monday and Tuesday, then break on Wednesday, and then have cohort B come to school on Thursday and Friday means that there would be less cross-contamination between the 2 groups. So at this point, we're looking to recommend more of an AA space BB model. And as Mr. O'Neill explained, while all of this is going on, we also have the option for parents who are not ready to send their students back to be at home learning virtually all week. And I'll let Mr. Anderson come in at this point and talk a little bit more about how that would work.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. McCabe. Can I just make a comment, Cindy, at this point?
Sure.
Okay, again, I like the idea of the AABB to really look out for the health and safety of everyone. My question concerns, again, the virtual learning. Would a teacher then be expected to do both, to do the in-school instruction and the virtual learning? as well, because I'm hearing from teachers that, you know, it's just really hard to do them both and to do them both well.
Yes, and Mr. Anderson is going to get into that. Good question.
And before he does, Ms. Herbert, you probably have a comment related to this, but
Yes.
Dr. Dorsey, Mr. Anderson is going to address that in just a second.
And,
Okay, good.
and I know, Ms. McCabe, you and I have talked on several occasions, and the one thing I did ask her this past week or last week, I said, wouldn't it be just easier to put a camera in every classroom and have it live? And you can't do that. So I wanted everybody to know that is not lawful to do that. So that would save a lot of problems, and we could just go to it. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody, and other people have brought that up to me too. Why can't we put just a camera in the room and just, if you're staying virtual, then stay at home and then watch the class with your class. But it doesn't work that way legally. So I just wanted everybody to know that. So
Why is that not lawful?
But private schools do it.
Yeah.
Private schools do it for both this situation, it made it easier for them, but also when you're absent. When you're absent, you're told to just
Right.
watch the school go on. So, yeah, I didn't know it was illegal, but I can...
There's some kind of laws around that.
Right. I think there's some, and maybe Ms. Eisenberg can jump in here as it relates to FERPA provisions.
Well, there's a lot of things going on. First, there is such a thing as robots. And I know that for some children who are on home and hospital in some places in this country, a robot is put in the class which doesn't follow the other students but follows the teacher.
That's what I was going to ask.
The issue regarding privacy is a very big one because you don't want what's going on with all of the other children in the classroom to be seen by people who you don't know are seeing it. But there is, so I mean, these are very, it's very complex.
It is. It is very complex, and I'll go ahead and answer a few of the questions right now. So as Ms. McCabe said, the feedback we received has been overwhelmingly asking for an AABB. I wanted to go ahead and just give some insight to the board of why we were making this recommendation. We do know that there's been a number of neighboring school districts looking at both as well. One of the biggest issues that we are trying to remedy is the issue of equity. And we know that operationally there's no doubt that the AABB cohort type of model that's being proposed that we're going ahead and considering now, operationally, as far as the disinfectant on Wednesday, would probably be, it would be a great thing. Our concern is that we have hundreds of students that lack connectivity and access on a daily basis. And so with the AA cohort, BB cohort, a teacher's not seeing a student face-to-face for nearly 6 days. When you went the AB, every third day the student is seeing the teacher. And that's why we proposed that. As Ms. McCabe said, we can argue both sides. We were proposing the idea, if folks were comfortable, that we wanted our kids to see their teachers every third day, rather than waiting 6 days to see their teacher again. So that's why we initially proposed that. But as Ms. McCabe said, the feedback we're getting from the health department as well is recommending that we stay with the AABB. With that in mind, either way, the students are only seeing their teacher 2 days a week. That third day, that Wednesday, will be a virtual day. And so that will be an opportunity, and I heard a lot of feedback tonight in public comment, that would be an opportunity for our teachers to provide 20% of the instructional block of time in a synchronous environment. And what that means is what we're doing right now through video conferencing. Dr. Dorsey, your question was about, will teachers be responsible then for also teaching virtually? Well, on the days that, if you are a B student and your cohort is at home that day, we will be asking teachers simply to go into Google Classroom and to post the assignments that she or he did with the students that were with them that day. So it would be an asynchronous environment. So it would be almost like if the student was sick that day, they could go into Google Classroom and see what the lesson was that day and what the handouts were and what the artifacts were of the lesson. The amount of work for a teacher would be simply posting those pieces into Google Classroom, in addition to teaching half their class that day, no doubt. And I don't want to minimize that, but I'm trying to give an example of what it would look like. In regards to Mrs. Herbert's question, there are some issues in regards to student safety and the whole idea of FERPA. Our team is already starting to look at and making recommendations that if a teacher is recording themselves, just as if I were teaching you right now, that is okay. I can share that video of me teaching a lesson, very similar to a Screencastify, very similar to me just capturing myself teaching a concept, and I might be able to go ahead and use an online whiteboard to show that. Once again, Dr. Dorsey, I could post that as an assignment in Google Classroom, and when students, if they are at a daycare that day because their parents are working, when they get home that evening, they can go ahead and log into Google Classroom and see what the lesson was that day. A couple other things I wanted to share in regards to the virtual option Mr. O'Neill referred to. If a family decides to go virtual, completely virtual, and even if we're in stage 2 right now, we're offering the hybrid, the only solution that we have to offer right now, unfortunately, because as Mr. O'Neill said, we don't have the staff to do all the things that we want to do, would be the 1 day a week, which would be, around 20% of the time would be a virtual synchronous time for that family. That would be the only day that the student would be synchronous with their teacher, would be on that Wednesday. So what I'd like to do is stop right there to make sure I answered everyone's questions.
Mr. Anderson, can I ask some follow-up questions on that? Because that's not necessarily what I was thinking of for the 100% virtual, because we're thinking that we needed to provide options, right? So if we were to go back in a hybrid model for some chunk of our students and our staff, that there's going to be some high-risk groups that are going to want to stay 100% virtual. And in a perfect world, we'd have the same percentage of kids that want to go virtual and the same percentage of employees who would want to be 100% virtual, and you could marry those up. I'm not saying that we'd be lucky enough to have that ideal situation play out, but if we were, isn't there a way to marry up the 100% virtual teachers with the 100% virtual students across the county, that there could be a whole lot more live instruction and synchronous instruction for those groups? So it wouldn't necessarily, it could be one teacher, one elementary school teacher, say a third grader might have third graders from 5 different schools that would be in one 100% virtual class.
Yeah, I understand the question. And right now, the example that you're using for elementary is far more realistic and far more possible, although still very, very difficult with the math that's involved. What we do know is when you run a virtual environment, a complete virtual environment, obviously we want to keep the numbers as we would with an on-site classroom size, right? So we know that we don't want to add more students because that's, on top of a virtual environment, that's just going to water it down even more. When we get into the middle school and high schools is when it becomes extremely complex. We simply don't have certificated individuals to teach the complex and more sophisticated content that would be necessary across the board. We're already very, very concerned about the idea that if we come back in a hybrid model at the high school level in particular, how difficult it's going to be to go ahead and, number one, bring 2 cohorts in throughout the week, and then to make certain that we can keep the classes at a manageable size, not only for homeroom, but then once they're dispersed into their second course or second mod that day, if you're heading to world languages, it may end up that the principal's looking at, oh my goodness, I have 21 kids in here, but my geometry class only has 7 on that day. It's extremely difficult to plan for that, and I'm not making excuses. I'm just giving the realities of it would be, in an ideal situation, it would be great to say we have 25 teachers that are going to be with compromised immune systems that will be teaching totally virtual with all of the families that want to be totally virtual. the reality is, and John and HR can probably talk more to this, the math doesn't line up. John, I don't know if you wanted to share anything in regards to that.
Right. One of the things we know from the state and their plan is that they're not waiving the certification requirements. And so with very few limits, you can't teach outside of the area for which you're certified. And I think that's why Jason's saying it's somewhat easier at the elementary school, because in general, other than the specials, art, music, physical ed, in general, there's 2 certifications: early childhood, which gets you pre-K through grade 2, and then elementary, which would cover grades 1 through 6. When you get into the secondary levels, then certifications are much, much more specific. And MSDE has made it clear that that's not a regulation that they're going to waive. So it would take almost it would take a mathematical miracle for it to work out that the teachers who could only be virtual could fill the virtual classrooms based on certification areas.
So that rule in the state, from the state, is they can teach one class out of their...
It's to be fair to the state, it's actually an existing regulation, a state board approved regulation, and it's one that they've commented. And if you go to the Maryland Together plan, they've commented that that's not a waiver or a relaxation they're willing to make. And I understand why under ESSA and local state laws, they don't want to sort of shortchange a content. And so, regardless, they've made that decision that that's not an area that's open for relaxation for us, for any local board.
Is there any way to alleviate some of that with offering certain courses 100% virtual? Like if you could marry up, so you've got world languages, AP government. Is there some way that you could make those 100% virtual and then make it work? I mean, just trying to understand if there's any way to alleviate some of those.
There are some ways, President Savigny, and we are working closely with Ms. McCabe and through our curriculum office and our virtual learning as we're augmenting that program. We will be offering more seats for students to move in that direction. And to have a complete virtual experience if families choose to. But again, this would be our first year really moving in that direction. Some school systems are talking 1,200 students a year that are going that direction. I believe last year we had less than 10 that would even be considered to be that type of student, if not smaller.
So here was one of the questions I had regarding virtual learning, because some of the emails we kept seeing was, well, I can't teach in class and virtual at the same time. When I think of virtual learning, this is exactly what I think of virtual learning. We have this little hand thing. You can raise your hand. And so this is what I envision. And I literally envisioned a teacher being in the computer, the kids are on the other side, and then you have those that are home. Is that something that either we can't do because of technology, or something that just it would not work, or this is just how I envision things? I mean, it's easy that you can take attendance. I mean,
you're 100% correct, Ms. Battaglia. So what I'll say to you is during the, I'll call it Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday days, the students that are in the classroom, our teachers at this time, even though they are amazing, and they've done an amazing job as was shared in public comment, we should be celebrating. We don't have time to. We have to keep moving. But they've done an amazing job of just engaging students last spring. Once we have students in the room, the job becomes twice as more difficult to run a virtual synchronous environment while also teaching 15 kids in a classroom. And that's not the expectation of us right now. The expectation, what you're referring to, Ms. Battaglia, would be on Wednesday, when all students would be virtual. And at that time, teachers would be required, and as it indicates in the plan, that 20% of the instructional block would be synchronous. What you're referring to, when you can raise your hand and be a part of a chat board and respond to one another, is a true virtual experience. that our students and teachers would be taking part in on Wednesday. On Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, those students that are in the building will be taught by the teacher. And what we're recommending is that any student that is in a cohort when they're at home, they would go onto Google Classroom and see the asynchronous assignment that's posted that is aligned to the instruction that was taking place face-to-face that day in the classroom.
So a major concern or question that I had with that was that if the teachers are expected to teach new information every single day, then doesn't that kind of create a gap where if they don't understand or aren't able to have the ability to ask questions, then maybe the days where the B students are in class will mostly be spent reviewing the material that they were supposed to learn when they were on the Monday or Tuesday day.
That's right, Devanshi, and that's another reason why what you're referring to is the lack of continuity of instruction because of some kids being there and not getting direct instruction on a daily basis is the concern. And that's why we were proposing the AB, so that every third day, at least you could be in front of your teacher, to your point. But our primary goal right now is to keep kids safe, and that's what we've heard loud and clear. So our options right now are basically what we're articulating, that, yeah, there's no doubt that it may slow the pace of instruction because there might be a lot of review going on when the students do get into the classroom with their teacher.
So when it is a possible AA or BB scenario, for such example, high school, will they be expected to go to all, say, 6 or 4 mods in the day, or what will come to the AB schedule?
Yeah, so basically when we, to answer your question, so we're going to continue, we're making a recommendation when we get to the schedules of holding suit with our 4 mods a day. On the virtual day, what we're recommending is that we would run a normal day, but the first 20% of the block would be an actual virtual synchronous experience. As we heard in the public comment today, we heard a lot of feedback in regards to students shouldn't be on devices all day. The literature out there is suggesting that 20% of the instructional block should be synchronous online. And then there was also literature out there saying that, listen, about 120 minutes a day for elementary, go ahead and do middle school, about, looking at about 240, and then our high school is looking at about 320 plus minutes a day that students should be working on their academics. But yeah, we are looking to continue with the 4 mod schedule.
Okay, I got to think about this because if you do AA and then you do your Wednesday virtual and then BB, being in the classroom, our kids are behind already, and is there any way they can do massive cleaning on Mondays evening somehow so that we can do AB, because our kids are going to lose out on that Wednesday.
Ms. Herbert, that's what the team has talked a lot about, and that's our dilemma, is that I would, obviously AB, every third day you get to see your student.
Right.
But operationally, to be realistic and to be safe, that's why folks are proposing the idea of AA, BB.
And I do understand that.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
This is Ed. I'm one of the ones who's been. I called the superintendent this morning and sent some comments to the staff regarding this plan. And my biggest concern has to do with, if we're concerned about the spread of COVID-19 and you have an index case in a classroom, that they're going to potentially infect some other kids. And the problem we have is when people who are in the early stages of COVID, they could be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, and you're going to wind up with those kids that have been in close contact with the one person who was the index case, potentially infecting a lot of other people if we go with this Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday type setup. What would be better is if we have those cohorts together for those 2 days, then we've essentially got 6 days to sort all of that out. And with the incubation period and the contact tracing and all that, there's a lot less risk of those people who would be secondarily infecting other people and potentially having to close down classrooms or entire schools, because now we not only have one person who's been shedding the virus, but we've got a couple of other people who we haven't been able to determine may have caught the virus from that one index case that could be shedding it to other kids as well. So I'm strongly recommending to you that the having the cohorts on Monday and Tuesday, and the same cohort on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday, from a contact tracing standpoint and a disease spread of disease standpoint, is really the way that I would recommend that you go.
And I do understand that, Mr. Singer, but now I'm thinking about the AA and then the virtual day and then the BB, and BB's always going to be behind.
Well, it definitely presents, again, intellectually, I understand all options, as does our team, and we've debated it for weeks. And so it makes sense to me what Mr. Singer's saying, as a professional, as a father.
I feel like Mission Impossible music should be playing in the
right.
background.
And I understand it. I do.
I think that we have to look at everything on a spectrum, right?
Absolutely.
You want to do educational opportunities and benefits are a top priority, but safety is also a top priority, and you can't do one without sacrificing the other. So it's basically trying to understand what's sort of the optimization of that, right? Like, so definitely what's best for instruction is to have all students in the school building 5 days a week, regular traditional model, right? But from a safety perspective, that's the worst case scenario, right? So how do you kind of bring things in from both directions and try to find that medium? Because I think from an educational perspective, the ABAB is better, but from a safety perspective, the AABB is better. So how do we find all those levers, and how do we optimize everything?
And thanks for your group for doing all this hard work.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I'm surprised you all have any hair left on your head.
I do want to make
sharing an opinion on this, but my concern is, and if you think about it from an educational standpoint here, my biggest concern is we want to do everything we can when we're doing our contact tracing and whatnot to keep from potentially having to close any classrooms or any schools down. And I know that's something that's discussed in this plan, and I'm going to tell you that there's much more risk of having to close an entire classroom or an entire school if you go with the ABAB as opposed to the AABB. And I think the worst thing that we could do for our kids' education is to potentially have things closed back down and have to go to an all-virtual format in the middle of. If we're going to start with a hybrid model, switching back and forth from one to the other is just going to make things a mess.
So is there any way that we could possibly use teachers' assistants or maybe tutors or like that to help the people in the B cohort when on the days that they're not in school?
No, that's a great question, Devanshi, and it's a great suggestion. And the answer is we're still exploring that. What we've heard is just a resounding positive, let us help you from our instructional assistants. They're looking to be more involved, and they're awesome, and they're going to be part of our professional learning as we move into August. So that's something we can definitely explore. But there is some, not that I personally feel this way, right, but there are some certificate responsibilities that we must adhere to make sure that the qualified folks are actually delivering the instruction at times. So it's a great suggestion, and I love it, and we've talked about that, yes.
Okay, and I don't want to go back and belabor this point, but I'm still having a hard time. If I'm in cohort B on Monday and receiving virtual learning, are you saying that I would be getting the assignments that the cohort A group got that morning?
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that a teacher would be having 15 students in their room that day, and whatever they're working on to make sure that the pace of instruction continues, I know not ideal, but they would be providing the same work asynchronously to the students. And that's, at this time, that's what we're thinking would keep students on pace and keep them working together and being exposed to the same material.
Okay, what are the plans or the thoughts on who will comprise cohort A and who will comprise cohort B? I mean, are we...
Yeah. So there's lots of discussions, and I'll definitely let my colleagues jump in on this. What we do know is, obviously, to Mrs. Herbert's comment earlier, we want to make sure that all families are coming on the same day for multiple reasons, right? That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is, once that's done, we may want to start with the most difficult scenarios, which oftentimes, and again, this is just, we're contemplating this right now, would be our high school students, to make sure they're getting their coursework to keep their pathway for graduation and make sure that they're getting all their requirements done. Then siblings of those high school students, and then begin to fill in, if you will, the spots at the middle school and elementary school. We want to be sensitive to our families, no doubt, number one priority. But then we also need to make sure that we're providing access and opportunity to the pathway for our high school students to make sure that they can get their coursework necessary, not only for graduation, but if they are pursuing a specific pathway. I don't know if John or Cindy want to jump in on that either, but that's what we're thinking right now.
And the other thing that we're taking into consideration is that, especially at the elementary and middle school level, by homeroom, we want to make sure that homerooms are designed in such a way that the teacher has about half the cohort in Group A and half in Group B.
And operationally, we're going to hope and pray that that works out well for bus routes for us.
Oh.
Well, I was going to say, that sort of assumes that it's all going to lay out perfectly like that. And
yeah, and it won't, and we know that, but we'll have to tweak and make adjustments. But, you know, step one, and there's something coming up later in the presentation where we're going to request that you consider, on July 29th, that you consider kind of like a parent intention form, so we could at least get a benchmark for where people's thinking might be in addition to the surveys. But, you know, once Jason and Cindy's teams arrive at the cohort, then our team will take a look at how those cohorts have fallen out and how, you know, how that possibly aligns with transportation. And I just want the board to know that we spoke to the cabinet members and said, tonight's the night where you just jump in there whenever you have a thought, and as you can see, they're buzzing in like they're on Jeopardy. So I'm going to say that unless Mr. Hardesty has newer information than I do, just for lack of a better solution, and it would be sort of impossible to design different bus routes, different days of the week, or have different bus routes if we're in stage 2 today and stage 3, you know, Monday, and then back to stage 2 in December. Generally, our intent is to run our bus routes, and the kids in those cohorts get on in those days. And that way, whether we're in stage 2 or stage 3, in general, those bus routes hold. It's kind of what logistically we can handle. But we know, Dr. Dorsey, that, you know, it's just like everything else. It's not going to mathematically work out perfectly, and we're going to have to figure that out as we get closer to the year.
So, John, I have a question. I'm sure it's later on here as well regarding attendance and everything. And kind of like what I was saying about how they have to, you know, do something like this model, wouldn't it be beneficial to have something like a set schedule so all students kind of have to check in with the teacher, then that half a class would turn off, do what they need to do at home, the other class would be in the classroom. And I think because that way it kind of gets that little bit of structure back that they have to maintain a little bit, that they're going to have to wake up at a certain time, that they're going to have to check into the class. You know what I mean? That way it's kind of like attendance. Because I think a lot with high schoolers, attendance is a big deal, especially when it comes to college applications. And this also kind of is a nice check-in with the teacher so the teacher can make sure that everything is going on okay with the student. Is that something that would be good too to offer?
Yeah, so we've discussed that idea, and a lot of the feedback we got back is that this is all still very new for us. It's going to be very difficult for us to be teaching 15 students in a room with social distancing, and then you're going to ask those students to work independently while I log on, and try to teach virtually then. So it would be a very different scenario than what our educators have experienced in the past. The other piece that we're very sensitive to is the idea that with this schedule, to Dr. Dorsey's point, we have students in CTE that need to get hours. We have students, that are pursuing, that need lab hours. That we're trying to figure out a way in this hybrid schedule where it can work. To your point, Ms. Battaglia, it would be most ideal if we could figure out a schedule where people could log in and just connect with teachers throughout the day. But the realities are that we're going to continue to be running a similar day than we have in the past, with limited time to make sure, and especially if we only have those kids 2 days a week, they need our undivided attention, if that makes any sense.
And I will say one thing that John brought up, and Jason said reality, is that, number one, we can't make any plans until we know how many students are actually going to come and take a seat, and then we also have to find out how many educators are going to come back. So we can do all these plans, but until we find out numbers, I know it's going to make it very difficult. And then you'll look at the buses, and then we'll figure out the rest of it. But until we get numbers from both those groups, it's very hard to plan. And I thank you all, because this is like undating tests.
Right, and it's like assuming that cohort A and cohort B are going to sort of be moving lockstep in one sense. And again, how reasonable is that?
Right.
Right, and I think that we need to have options, right? I mean, we're going to need to have, because of how things might progress. Let's say that, something blows up with the epidemic and the state moves back to phase 1. We need to have a 100% virtual option up and running that we can piggyback off of. If we move to phase 3, we need to have, or if we stay in phase 2 for a long time, we need to have a hybrid model that's up and running. We also need to know how we're going to transition back to regular traditional learning once we get to phase 3. So we need to have all of these options. We need to have a version of all of these options ready to go, regardless of what the numbers are. I agree with you that we can't do the optimization exercise, right, of figuring out exactly which kids go into which of the models until we have better ideas on the numbers, but we still need to have the best fleshed out version of each one of these options ready to go. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
It does make sense, but I think along with it, sort of look at how it will play out practically. Because again, if we can't really put it into operation, what good is having it?
Right, and I'm really struggling with this Wednesday. I'm struggling if the 100% virtual kids, the only instruction that they're getting, if we're not marrying up 100% virtual students with 100% virtual teachers, and we're saying that the 100% virtual kids will be integrated with all of this, and then the only live instruction that they're going to be getting is on that Wednesday, and it would be with the other kids that are already getting the other in-person instruction, and we're only requiring teachers to do 20% of that time on Wednesday as synchronous with all the students. That means those Wednesday 100% virtual kids, all they're getting is 20% of one day. That's live. That's not a good option.
It's definitely a limited option. When you're looking at virtual courses, typically, I think Ms. McCabe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like 20% of the time is face-to-face when you do a regular virtual course. So I'm not saying it's ideal, President Savigny, by any means. What I'm proposing is that based on the staffing that we have, where we're at right now, I think that's the option we're presenting.
But I think
to Ms. Herbert's comment a bit ago, and by the way, your questions, your observations are all spot on, and basically you're part of the planning committee at this point. These are the things we've been grappling with for many, many weeks now. You know, Mrs. Herbert, everything drives the next thing, and so, you know, planning out all of the operations, this slide on your screen, not that it can't be AABB instead of ABAB, but defining that instructional model of, you know, at least defining it at the level of 50% of students or 25, you know, whatever it turns out to be. That's really the driving force behind the rest of the planning all the way around. And then it's, can we get that additional information on which parents intended to opt for virtual versus in person, and you know, that further defines it. But the whole rest of the plan is really driven by this hybrid model, at least in the sense that it's a 50% cohort approach, and then, you know, like you're discussing, then it's about staffing and operations and logistics and somehow making it all go, and hoping that nothing goes wrong on a given day to make it not go for that school or for the system.
And I find also, John, that I know it seems like we got 1,000 emails. And I
maybe more.
Yeah, and I did see, or I did feel, or when I read, that I felt that parents wanted to get the schools open, let's do it, and now I think that, you know, from what I was reading, they're pulling back, and someone said, you know, I answered it to open up schools, and now I see, now we want to do virtual, but if they're listening to this right now, they might be having second thoughts about virtual. So, you know, we're just gonna, it's a no-win situation for everyone right now.
So, Ms. Herbert, that's a great point. I think as we get into the slide deck further, we can get in and really start talking about what the complete virtual solution looks like. I just want to remind everyone, this is the stage 2 hybrid model. This is not our complete virtual solution.
Right.
Our enhanced virtual solution actually has been working really, really well this summer, and I believe some of you guys have received some feedback.
Great comments back. Great feedback back by all.
Yeah.
So I know some other counties across Maryland have already announced that they will be switching to fully virtual in the fall to start off with. So is that an option that we are considering, like, putting in place at this meeting or at future meetings?
Well,
I think we're considering everything at this point.
Yeah.
I'll jump in. I know we had said at this meeting, I mean, the board, whatever the board's pleasure ends up being in terms of making decisions, it's the board's prerogative to do so. We were not prepared this evening. We hadn't really notified the community that we'd be making any decisions on here's exactly what's going to happen. However, to your point, we've said all along, in stage 2, an all virtual start is still an option. The hybrid model is still an option. The hybrid with, as we've been discussing, all virtual combination is a model. While not completely ideal, and we've heard all the reasons why, still an option. And as Ms. Savigny said earlier, we're trying to get through the understanding of all these and all the nuances and challenges, because as we've discussed this evening, we may need to shift between. The conversation around the cohort in the hybrid model of AABB and ABAB, I get both sides of that. I think I lean toward what Mr. Singer has been sharing with us as it relates to the health and safety component. Here's what I want to say. The point he's making about contact tracing is critical. Because you're going to see in this plan, we have all sorts of protocols to follow, and there's plenty of chances for schools to be, or classrooms to be shut down, or schools to be shut down in following those protocols. And if an AABB minimizes that, then I want to follow that, because it's going to be harder. This is the hardest schedule we're looking at. And we don't want to make it worse. We don't want to be on one week or you know, moving along and then have to close. Some of that's going to be out of our control, but if there are things like Mr. Singer is recommending that could minimize that, then I want to follow it. Even though, Instructionally, on the other schedule, it resonates with me in terms of why we would do it that way. But for me, the safety component is more important in terms of keeping some continuity, perhaps, week to week. So if your head hurts, welcome to the club, because these are the things that are keeping us up every night and 24/7.
It may be helpful, board members, it may be helpful if we move into the sections like Jason just referenced. All of those sections are built around this model, not so much the AB part of this model, but the 50% cohort model that may help form more questions, clarify questions, or bring your thinking to a different point. If you want, we can move forward and try that and then come back to this. This is, as I said a bit ago, this is kind of the central part of the rest of the planning, so we wanted to get this out first. The next few slides walk through the major sections of the plan itself, almost as if it's a table of contents. Is that okay to move in that direction?
If it's okay, I haven't gotten the opportunity to make a comment on this slide, and I've got a few. Number one, the AABB. I understand the safety part, but also, and I know the thought of seeing them every 3 days is giant, but consecutive days can also be good too. To me, with kids, every 3 days, I feel like the first half hour you're telling them what happened 3 days ago. 2 consecutive days might be better. Secondly, I think there's got to be a way to do attendance without the teacher seeing it. I understand that A is doing live while B is doing the same thing virtually, but I think we're selling both sides short if that teacher has to break away and do anything with the second group. They need to focus on the group they have that day and give them their fair shot. Now, all that considered, I think the totally horrible day is Wednesday, and that really worries me. The kids in the virtual learning seem to have a lot of problem being on their computer at a specific time, be it that dad and mom's using the system at work, they're at daycare, and daycare only has so many computers available, et cetera, et cetera. I talked to one teacher from the spring, and I think the teachers did great. I'm not cracking on anybody more than maybe on the kids a little bit. She said, and this was high school, I had a class of 22 kids, and by the 1st of June, I might have had 8 being active. This Wednesday day, it just seems like so much is going on virtually with the A's, the B's, and the 100% virtuals. I don't know how they can all get on at the right time and do it. And maybe you guys have an answer for that. I hope you do, but it's just, I love what we did in the spring. And part of my reason is caring about the students, and I don't even want to get into the underserved students now who we've totally screwed with last spring and we're getting ready to do for the fall without. They need to be there 5 days. I almost wish the best program could function 5 days a week independently of the rest of this or something. I don't know how we get all the kids that we beat so hard to try to help because they're underserved are the ones we're least helping with this whole system. They might not even have a computer. So again, I understand the ABs, and I think it's got to be AA, it's got to be BB, but Wednesday scares the hell out of me.
So, Mr. Kyler, I'm going to be responding to a number of your statements as we get into the plan. But on that day, as I mentioned earlier, the schedule will be similar to as if they were in the building. They would attend all 4 classes. They would attend all 4 classes, and a portion of it would be synchronous video conferencing on that Wednesday. It's enhanced considerably more than what we offered last spring.
So what greater measures or things will we do to ensure that equitable technology access throughout the county? And also because when we did do distance learning in the spring, many students, they started off with not knowing how to access certain applications or use them. So will we possibly will we possibly be doing like tutorials for them?
Yeah, absolutely, Devanshi. And again, we're going to get into it with the plan in regards to professional learning. But this August, we're going to be offering over 180 sessions, 42 different topics for all of our teachers, instructional assistants, and we're also looking at implementing what we're calling an instructional technology boot camp the first several days of the school year, where students can actually become more familiar with the instructional apps that you're referring to that teachers are going to be using, so that they are more proficient and being more engaged. Going back to Ms. Battaglia's comments and concerns as well, each day students' engagement will be measured by their ability to go ahead and respond, Devanshi, maybe through an application where they have to go ahead and provide a response that would show that they were attending that day and that they were engaged that day, and that would suffice for the engagement measures those days. So we have lots of guidelines that we're going to be presenting. To the points earlier about not all of it's in this plan. It would be hundreds of pages, but we will be providing instructional guidelines for our teachers and things that they should be doing when they're introducing this to our students. In addition to that, Mr. Kyler mentioned the concern of our historically underserved students. We have made a commitment at the high school level to provide a device for every single high school student in Carroll County Public Schools. In addition to that, we heard from public comment as well is that we still have then connectivity issues. Mr. Davis just recently sent me some excellent metrics in regards to, we asked principals to go through and identify every student in their building who had indicated they did not have connectivity in their home. So we are investing in jetpacks and hotspots so that students will have internet connectivity that we will be providing as a school system to eliminate that digital divide as we move forward. Again, this is all in our plan. The specifics, and once we get to it, I'll be able to talk more about it.
And Mr. Anderson, would that be ready by the start of the school year? The hotspots
I know
and the
Mr.
jetpacks?
Davis is on it. We've been communicating the actual laptops. We are going with laptops at the high school. We're very confident where we sit in the queue that they'll be available. Mr. Davis, did you want to talk about, I know you and I were just communicating 2 days ago about the jetpacks and through T-Mobile. Did you want to chime in on that?
Sure. There's two things. One, the laptops very likely will not be ready by the beginning of the school year. We're competing with everybody in the world. Some of the folks that ordered in March at the beginning still have not seen the devices show up. So, and it's all of the laptops, Chromebooks, everything that's, in high demand. So it's highly likely that they will not be available at the beginning of the school year. However, we did distribute 1,600 of our laptops to students who did not have access at home. We do have more available, so if more students were to say that I don't have something available at home, we have the ability to meet that need. Obviously it'll run out at some point, but based on the feedback that we got and looking at the statistics of who connected, we know the kids were connecting with their own devices, just from looking at the statistics. As far as the internet access, there's a couple things going on, and I'll bring this up quickly, but Governor Hogan had made an announcement a few weeks ago about additional funding he was providing for education, and specifically through the Office of Rural Broadband, and we've been working with Kenrick Gordon, who's the director of that in the governor's office, the CIO group at the state level. One of the things they're going to do is provide funding to fund either Comcast Internet Essentials and or whatever other, but including the jetpacks, the MiFis, whatever you want to call them. So we went through the list and we were able to identify a large portion of the people who identified themselves as not having access to internet as being Comcast is available for them. They may be even existing customers on the television side, just not on the internet side. And the Comcast Internet Essentials is available for farm students at $9.99 a month. So the point that I would make is that we are very cognizant of the situation. We've been running tests all over the county, looking at different options as far as which jetpacks have coverage, because that's one of the problems that you have with those mobile devices is you're never, not only can there be the problem of not having Comcast available, but you may not have coverage for those devices. So we are looking at the address level and driving around the county to make sure that there's access. So as far as that's concerned, we have a plan to address that. The devices will not all be, will not be here, all the investment that we've made in high school laptops for every student. But like I said, we have distributed 1,600. They still have the students, other than the seniors who had to return them, obviously. They're still out there. We have more devices available if more students were to say, I need a device. So that's where we stand with that right now.
Thanks, Kate.
So we distributed 1,600. If we were to actually give one to every high school student, we're talking about 7,500. Is that?
Yeah, it's closer to 8,000, around 7,900, something like that.
Okay.
10% of our student population took advantage of the device when we provided the opportunity.
So can high school students opt out if they possibly have their own devices and they aren't in need of one from the county?
Yeah, so we're going to be working on those guidelines, Devanti. One of the reasons why we were very, very encouraged by moving in this direction is because we're moving towards a learning management system where we'll be availing all of our content, all of our courses through an LMS. So that we want to make sure that right now we're not a bring your own device school system. We wanted to make sure students have access to the content. Every student in high school has access to the content through the device that we're providing. Student can take the device home, but while they're in school, oftentimes they don't have the accessibility through their own device. So we want to provide them with their own device. And also to give you more insight on that, once our high school students have those devices, then we can repurpose the devices that have been high school down to the middle schools and start to looking at equipping our middle school students with a device as we move towards a learning management system.
All right.
Okay. Sections of the plan. Dr. Locker, were you going to make a comment? Or?
No, I appreciated all that information and feedback, and I was going to ask that you go ahead and move to that next section. And of course, anytime we have questions or need clarification, let's do it.
Did we spend enough time on one slide?
Just have to take a deep breath.
Listen, there's a lot behind that one slide, and those are all really good, poignant questions that we needed to ask.
We did indeed, but that's one slide is the most important part for the whole rest of this plan, so we appreciate you going through that with us. The next, I think it would be 5 slides, outline the major sections of the plan, and so each of us is going to try to hit some of the highlights. These are the sections that comprise the meat of the 50-page plan we've been discussing. So there is an executive summary, which basically is just sort of the background of the plan development, the guidance that we spent time on earlier, and also back at the June 24th meeting, and then it sort of lays out the format. What you're seeing on the screen for the next 5 slides is essentially the table of contents for those major sections. And as far as the executive summary, unless you have a lot of questions about any of the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets, all I wanted to do was take a moment and let you know that we did want to address stakeholder feedback in the plan, and so there is a subsection in the executive summary. It notes that we have received a lot of feedback, not just from the identified representative stakeholder groups, but from the general public, from employees, from other groups as well. Each of you's referenced the volume. Dr. Lockhart has. Early on, we made a fairly noble attempt to reply to all of it, and we couldn't sustain that. We replied directly to some, but we can't reply directly to each person for every question. That feedback, as you know, spans the full spectrum of feedback. So it ranges from just sort of broad philosophical beliefs that somebody might share, ranging from, I believe you should open your schools and do it right away, to, you know, I have concerns and I believe you should be very cautious about how you open your schools. So sometimes it's not even something you would necessarily respond to because it's not a question, it's just this is what I believe. And then sometimes it's very, very specific questions, even at an individual level. And we talked a lot about that earlier when President Savigny, you had made some comments, and Ms. Mystery had made some really good comments. You know, hopefully we address that in the plan and in procedures and in other guidelines and communications that go out. We'll do our best to try to get all the pertinent questions. In the plan itself, we will include the broader feedback from the public. So eventually when we get to a final plan, the 6 survey results, because you will have had a survey for parents, for employees, and for students twice, or 2 surveys for each of those groups. So those results will be in a summary format and put in the plan as an appendix. And also the representative stakeholder groups that were specifically asked to vet the development of the plan and now the draft plan itself. Dr. Lockard, when he sent the draft plan to those stakeholder groups, he sent a cover email, and in it he asked that if that group as a whole wanted to collect their feedback and forward that to us, then we would take that collective feedback from each of those stakeholder groups, and that feedback unedited will appear as an appendix in the plan as well. So when we get to a final draft, you'll see that, and many of those groups have already started to turn that around. So that's it for the executive summary, unless there's questions, and we'll get right back into the heart of the matter with Jason and Cindy. I did want to take a minute, and literally maybe less than a minute, and just say right here that, you know, Dr. Locker said to me, would you be the plan coordinator? And what that really means is all I do is take a lot of hard work from a lot of other groups and teams and committees and take their work and turn it into a formatted plan and help put together these presentations to describe the plan. But I did want to say that, you know, a lot of people, the cabinet members, but other employees, the stakeholders, people are putting hours and hours and hours of thoughtful work into this. And we know that, you know, not everyone's going to agree with everything or like every aspect of it, and we understand that. But I didn't want to not take that minute tonight to say to my colleagues that I do value and appreciate the amount of time and energy and effort that's been put into pulling all this together. And I've sat in some of those meetings, and I understand how much attention's been given, and the stakeholders too. I mean, the feedback's been tremendous. And so just before I turn this back to Jason, I wanted to just make that comment and let them know how much I appreciate all the work.
And Mr. O'Neill, I really want to thank you for those comments, and I think the board member, I think I can probably speak on behalf of the board members that we really appreciate all the hard work and effort that has gone into this as well, and we don't want any of our comments to be taken as you know, negative, like we don't think that you're doing a great job. You know, it's just that this is an impossible situation. And we're basically just trying to ask questions in order to help brainstorm and help get to a better answer. But it doesn't provide any negative reflection on the work that's been done. Sure. And I think that you heard it a lot from the citizen participation tonight, where, you know, there are just so many people on every part of that spectrum, right? You had several people say do the right thing, but they actually meant completely different things, right? Like this is, so one person said do the right thing, and that was in that person's mind 100% virtual. You had another person say do the right thing, and in that person's mind was 100% traditional model in person. So clearly the right thing is viewed very differently by a lot of other people. And this while I think that staff and Dr. Lockard and everybody has done a tremendous job over the last couple of years to try to always get us to a win-win situation. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a win-win situation right now. Right now, we're trying to come up with the least bad.
And I think one thing a lot of us saw too is in our emails, like, don't make this political. This isn't political.
It's not political.
For me, it's not political. I had not heard one thing from you guys that it's political. To me, it's based on safety. The death of one child is one too many. The death of a staff member is one too many. we have all noticed things are changing. We're all paying attention to what's going on in the news. This isn't political. This is based on what is best as a society for our community and our children and our staff and our families. That's what this is. And John, I can't thank you guys enough for everything that you do, because I know you guys are out there trying to figure out everything the best thing to do.
Right, we're all in the same challenging place together, and we know that. So we appreciate those comments, but that's where we find ourselves, and we understand that we're working at it the same way. So we thank you for echoing those sentiments. And with that, Mr. Anderson, I hope you grabbed a quick drink of water because you're back up for that.
Well, on that note, we've actually been at it for about 3 hours. Does it make sense, and we're not anywhere near the end, so does it make sense to take a 5-minute bio break for folks? Grab a quick bite to eat, a snack, hit the restrooms. So 5-minute bio break, does that make sense for everyone?
Sure.
I don't know, are we in need of a tape change or anything at this point, or will we be needing one later?
Are we needing anything like that? We're
think
good?
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can leave it live. We'll just...
Well, I think Pat will hit the pause button to the public. We'll reconvene at, let's see, it's 8:01, so 8:10. Is that okay?
Okay.
Give us about a 8 to 9 minute bio break. 8:10, and we'll
8:10, we'll unpause.
unpause. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.